Ethan Caldwell was 43 years old and spent most days crawling through hot attics, fixing broken HVAC systems across Des Moines. People saw him as the quiet husband with the old Ford truck, faded work boots, and gas station coffee stains on his jacket. The kind of man nobody noticed twice. What they didn't know was that Ethan used to investigate financial fraud for Mid-American Bank before he disappeared into a quieter life. At 11:58 p.m., he stood on his own front porch while freezing rain hit his neck, turning his house key again and again, inside a lock that no longer belonged to him. If you're watching from somewhere outside Iowa, tonight drop your country and local time in the comments. And if stories about betrayal, patience, and quiet revenge are your kind of stories, subscribe now. Tomorrow's story gets even colder. Rain rolled across Interstate 235 in long silver streaks, smearing the headlights into soft lines against the windshield of Ethan Caldwell's old Ford F-150. The truck heater clicked every few seconds like it was thinking about quitting for good. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting beside a paper sack from Culver's that neither he nor Marissa had touched. It was a Thursday night in October. Cold enough for jackets, not cold enough for snow. Marissa sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through luxury homes on Zillow, while soft pop music played through the truck speakers. Her nails tapped against the phone screen every few seconds. "Look at this one," she said. "West Glen, 6 bedrooms, indoor theater." Ethan glanced over briefly before focusing back on the road. "That place costs more than every house on our block combined. That's the point." He smiled faintly. Not waiting, just tired. The traffic slowed near a construction lane outside downtown Des Moines. Orange cones reflected in the rainwater like fire. Ethan checked the dashboard clock. 9:14 p.m. "You still stopping for coffee?" Marissa asked. "Need it if I'm finishing that rooftop unit tomorrow. Then pull into Hawkeye." The blue and yellow sign of Hawkeye Fuel Mart glowed ahead through the rain. Ethan eased the truck into the parking lot beside a row of semis, spraying mist from their tires. The station smelled like burned coffee and wet denim. A local weather report played from a television hanging above the beer coolers. Something about incoming winds from Nebraska. Ethan walked toward the coffee machines while Marissa wandered toward the counter lined with scratch-offs and lottery displays. Lenny Brooks stood behind the register. 58 years old, gray beard, Iowa Hawkeyes cap every single day. "Evening," Ethan Lenny said. Ethan lifted 2 fingers in greeting. "Coffee. Still terrible. Gets worse after 8 p.m. Keeps the expectations low." Marissa laughed softly from the counter. Then she stopped. A bright red Powerball sign flashed above the register. Estimated jackpot, $600 million. "Well," she said quietly, "that's insane." Lenny leaned on the counter. "Biggest one this year." Marissa looked toward Ethan. "We should buy one." Ethan poured coffee into a large paper cup. "You say that every jackpot, and one day I'll be right. You'd probably spend it all on kitchens with marble islands." "Wrong," she said. "I'd spend it on disappearing." The comment came out light, casual. But Ethan noticed the pause afterward. He carried the coffee to the counter anyway. What numbers? Lenny asked. Marissa immediately started listing birthdays. Our anniversary, June 17th. Ethan added his mother's birthday without thinking. March 3rd. Then Marissa added the number of their first apartment building in Cedar Rapids. Lenny punched everything in. The machine spit out the ticket with a sharp mechanical chirp. There you go, he said. Ethan handed over his debit card. The card attached to their joint checking account at First Horizon Credit Union. Lenny glanced between them and grinned. If you two win, don't turn into rich weirdos. No promises, Marissa said. Then Lenny pointed toward the back of the ticket. You should sign it. People lose those things all the time. Marissa laughed. We're not winning $600 million. Everybody says that 5 minutes before they do. Ethan reached for a pen sitting beside the register. Sign it anyway, he said. Marissa rolled her eyes but took the pen. She signed quickly. Marissa Caldwell. Then she handed the pen to Ethan. He signed beneath her name without hesitation. Ethan Caldwell. Lenny watched the whole thing happen while chewing gum slowly. There, Ethan said, officially protected from disaster. Marissa folded the ticket and slid it into her purse. The moment lasted less than 30 seconds. But Ethan still pulled out his phone and snapped a picture of the ticket before she zipped the purse closed. Marissa noticed. You photograph everything. Used to work fraud investigations, Ethan said. Habit. You haven't done that in like 15 years. Still a habit. Outside, the rain had gotten harder. They walked back toward the truck beneath flickering gas station lights. Marissa held her purse tightly under her coat, while Ethan balanced coffee in one hand and the food bag in the other. Neither of them knew the exact second their marriage quietly shifted shape. Maybe it happened under those lights. Maybe it started long before that. Back at the house on Ashworth Road, Ethan spent 20 minutes reviewing invoices from a commercial HVAC supplier while Marissa sat on the couch browsing homes again. The television played in the background without volume. At 10:37 p.m., Ethan finally closed the laptop. You staying up? He asked. Maybe. He nodded once and headed upstairs. Their house was modest compared to the neighborhoods Marissa liked online. 3 bedrooms, narrow kitchen, old oak floors that creaked near the stairs. Ethan had repaired almost everything himself over the years. Water heater, roof shingles, garage opener. Most weekends he fixed things instead of replacing them. Around 11:06 p.m., Ethan was half asleep when he heard something downstairs. Not a scream, not excitement, silence. A different kind of silence. The kind that suddenly fills a house when breathing stops for a second. He opened his eyes. Downstairs, the television volume came alive. Numbers flashed. A lottery announcer's voice echoed faintly through the floorboards. Ethan sat up slowly. Then he heard Marissa whisper something. Oh my God! He stood and walked toward the hallway. The blue light from the television flickered up the staircase. Marissa stood frozen in front of the screen. One hand covered her mouth. The other gripped the ticket so tightly the paper had bent in half. Ethan stopped halfway down the stairs. On the television, 6 white lottery balls remained displayed beneath the Powerball logo. Marissa looked down at the ticket. then back at the screen, then down again. Ethan watched her face lose color one layer at a time. Not excitement first. Fear. Pure fear. She didn't even notice him standing there yet. Ethan looked toward the television. The numbers matched. Every single one. A small sound escaped Marissa's throat. Barely audible. Ethan felt the air in the house change. Not warmer. Sharper. Like the pressure before a storm breaks windows. Then Marissa slowly turned around and saw him standing on the stairs. And for the first time in their entire marriage, Ethan saw his wife look at him like a problem. The television kept glowing blue across the living room walls while the lottery numbers remained frozen on the screen. Powerball 14. Marissa stared at the ticket like it might suddenly catch fire in her hands. Ethan stood on the staircase without speaking. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows over the kitchen sink. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and stopped. The refrigerator hummed in the silence. $600 million. The number sounded unreal, even inside his own head. Ethan slowly walked down the remaining stairs. "Let me see it," he said calmly. Marissa stepped backward immediately. Not dramatic, not obvious, just one small step. But Ethan noticed. His eyes settled on the purse hanging from her shoulder. The ticket had already disappeared inside. "That's our ticket," he said. Marissa swallowed hard. "I bought it. We bought it. You didn't even care about it." "I signed it." Her jaw tightened. For a second, neither of them moved. The television announcer kept talking excitedly about the historic jackpot somewhere behind them, but Ethan barely heard it anymore. He was watching Marissa's breathing. Quick, uneven, like someone already planning 3 moves ahead. Then her phone buzzed. She looked down immediately. A notification from a real estate group chat lit the screen. Marissa flipped the phone over face down. Ethan noticed that too. "You should call a lawyer tomorrow," he said quietly, "and a financial advisor. You already thought about that I used to investigate fraud cases. People lose money fast when panic starts." Marissa crossed her arms tightly. "I'm not stupid, Ethan. I didn't say you were." Another silence settled between them. Longer this time. Ethan walked toward the kitchen and poured himself water from the sink. His hand looked steady against the glass, but his mind was moving carefully now, organizing details automatically, the way it used to during audit investigations. The ticket was signed by both of them, purchased with a joint account, witnessed by Lenny Brooks, photographed on Ethan's phone. Simple facts, clean facts. He drank the water slowly. Behind him, Marissa grabbed her purse. "I need air," she said. Ethan turned slightly. "At midnight, I can't breathe in here." She headed toward the garage door. The moment she disappeared into the garage, Ethan pulled out his phone and reopened the photograph he had taken at Hawkeye Fuel Mart. The image was slightly blurry around the edges from the fluorescent lighting, but the signatures were clear. Marissa Caldwell. Ethan Caldwell. His thumb zoomed in carefully. Still clear. Then he opened the banking app. Transaction pending. Hawkeye Fuel Mart, $14.72. Timestamp 9:16 p.m. Ethan leaned back against the counter. Not because he distrusted his wife, not yet, because he suddenly understood something colder than betrayal. Money didn't change people in a single moment. It revealed direction. And Marissa was already moving. 23 minutes later, headlights swept across the front windows. Marissa returned. She walked inside quickly, without removing her coat. Her cheeks were red from the cold rain outside. "You went driving?" Ethan asked. "I needed to think." "About what?" She avoided the question. Instead, she walked straight upstairs. Ethan watched her disappear. Then he looked toward the garage. Her tires had sprayed mud across the driveway, fresh tracks. He stepped outside briefly into the freezing rain and glanced toward the street. One of the neighbors' security lights flicked on. The cold air smelled like wet leaves and asphalt. When Ethan came back inside, he locked the front door and stood quietly in the kitchen. Something felt wrong. Not emotionally wrong. Structurally wrong. Like a beam inside a house beginning to crack before the ceiling collapses. At 1:08 a.m., Ethan finally went upstairs. The bedroom light was off. Marissa lay facing away from him beneath the blankets. Her phone screen glowed faintly in the dark. Texting. The moment Ethan entered, the screen went black. He changed clothes without speaking and lay down on his side of the bed. The mattress suddenly felt much larger than usual. "You awake?" he asked after several minutes. "Yes. We need to keep this quiet for now." "I know. No friends, no social media, nobody." Another pause. Then Marissa asked softly, "What would you even do with that kind of money?" Ethan stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. "Pay off Mom's medical debt." "That's the first thing you thought about. She took care of me my whole life." Marissa gave no response. Ethan finally turned toward her. "What about you?" Her answer came instantly. "Leave Iowa." "Not us. Not we. Leave Iowa." Ethan noticed every word now. Years earlier, before HVAC work, before long service calls and frozen rooftops, and overtime weekends, Ethan Caldwell had worked inside the internal fraud division of Mid-American Bank in Omaha. His job had been simple in theory. Find patterns before damage spread. Most fraud cases failed because people panicked too fast. They bought expensive things immediately, moved money emotionally, trusted the wrong people. But the dangerous ones stayed calm first. Very calm. Ethan closed his eyes eventually, though he barely slept. At 5:42 a.m., he woke automatically. The other side of the bed was empty. He walked downstairs. Marissa stood in the kitchen, already dressed, in a cream-colored coat, with her car keys beside her coffee mug. "You're up early," Ethan said. "So are you." He opened the refrigerator and grabbed creamer. "You going somewhere?" "Meeting Claire." "Claire Benton?" "Marissa's friend from the real estate office." "About the ticket." Marissa took a sip of coffee without answering directly. "I just need advice." Ethan leaned against the counter. "From a realtor. She knows people." That sentence stayed in Ethan's head longer than it should have. She knows people. He watched Marissa carefully now, not as a husband, as someone studying movement. She checked her phone every 30 seconds. Her purse never left her shoulder. She avoided standing still. Then Ethan noticed something else. The ticket itself was no longer inside the side pocket of her purse, where she usually stored receipts and small items. He had seen her slide it there at the gas station. Now, the pocket was flat. "Where is it?" he asked. Marissa looked up instantly. "What?" "The ticket." A beat passed. Then another. "Safe." "Where? Why does that matter?" "Because we should probably put it in a bank lockbox." Her eyes hardened slightly. "I said it's safe." Ethan nodded once. No argument. No accusation. But inside his chest, something heavy settled into place. At 7:11 a.m., Ethan left for work. Mercy One Medical Center had a rooftop HVAC issue on the east wing, and his supervisor had already texted twice, asking for updates. The morning sky hung gray over Des Moines while traffic crawled through wet streets. Ethan drove in silence. Halfway downtown, his phone buzzed through the truck speakers. Incoming call, unknown number. He answered through Bluetooth. "Hello?" A male voice spoke quickly. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Trevor from Channel 8 News. We received information regarding Ethan, immediately disconnected." His eyes narrowed. He hadn't told anyone. Neither had Lenny, which meant only one person had started talking. At 11:47 p.m., that same night, after nearly 16 hours apart, Ethan pulled back into the driveway on Ashworth Road, carrying a toolbox and smelling faintly of machine oil and rooftop insulation. The porch light was off, but every downstairs light inside the house burned bright. He walked toward the front door slowly. Then he stopped. 2 large black trash bags sat beside the porch swing. His clothes, a winter coat, old boots, a framed photograph from his mother's house. Ethan stared at them for several seconds without moving. Rainwater slid from the roof gutters beside him. Then he reached into his pocket and inserted his house key into the lock. The key turned halfway, stopped. He tried again. Nothing. Inside the house, somewhere beyond the door, he heard movement. Then a soft, electronic chime. The Ring doorbell camera activated above him. A small blue light blinked alive. Ethan looked directly into it. And then Marissa's voice came through the speaker. Cold, controlled, unrecognizable. "You need to leave, Ethan." Rainwater dripped from Ethan Caldwell's jacket collar, while the blue Ring camera light stared at him from above the front door. "You need to leave, Ethan." Marissa's voice came through the speaker with the flat calm of someone reading prepared lines. Ethan stood motionless on the porch, not shocked anymore, past shock. His toolbox rested beside his boots. Water gathered slowly around the trash bags she had left outside. One of the bags had split slightly open, exposing folded flannel shirts and the sleeve of his old Nebraska Cornhuskers sweatshirt. He looked directly at the camera. "This is my house, too." Silence. Then the speaker crackled again. "You're making this harder than it has to be." The phrasing caught his attention immediately. Not emotional. Legal. Careful. As if someone had already coached her. Ethan glanced toward the living room window. A shadow moved briefly behind the curtains. Marissa was watching him without opening the door. He could have started yelling, Could have pounded on the wood hard enough to wake neighbors 3 houses down. Could have reminded her he paid most of the mortgage for 11 years. Instead, Ethan crouched calmly beside the trash bags and zipped them closed against the rain. The Ring camera kept recording. Good, he thought. Let it. He lifted the bags into the truck bed one by one. Then he grabbed the toolbox. Only after everything was loaded did he press the doorbell once. The speaker activated immediately, but Ethan's voice stayed level. Do not cash that ticket. A pause. Then Marissa answered carefully. It's mine. You signed it. No response. You understand exactly what that means. Another long silence. Then the connection clicked dead. The porch light shut off. Ethan stood alone in darkness for several seconds while cold rain tapped against the truck hood. At 12:21 a.m., he pulled into the parking lot of Prairie Lantern Inn near the edge of downtown Des Moines. The motel sat beside a shuttered Perkins restaurant and a half-empty auto parts store. The neon vacancy sign flickered weakly against the wet pavement. Inside the lobby, a tired clerk looked up from a baseball game playing behind the counter. One night, she asked. Probably. Ethan handed over his driver's license and credit card. The clerk typed slowly. Room 214, second floor, no elevator. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old carpet. A heater rattled loudly beneath the window. Ethan dropped the trash bags near the wall and sat on the edge of the bed without turning on the television. For the first time since seeing the winning numbers, the silence finally reached him. Not grief, calculation. He pulled out his phone and reopened the photograph of the lottery ticket. The image filled the screen. 2 signatures, 2 names. The ink looked slightly smeared, near Marissa's last name from rain on her fingers at the gas station. Ethan zoomed in further. Still readable. Then he opened his banking app again. Joint account transaction history. Hawkeye Fuel Mart, $14.72. Timestamp verified. He took screenshots. Then screenshots of the screenshots. Old habit. Document everything twice. Next, he opened his text messages with Marissa. The conversation from the gas station appeared near the top. Marissa, buy me a lucky ticket tonight. Ethan, only if you split the billions with me. Marissa, deal. Ethan stared at the messages for several seconds. Simple, casual, normal. But Quartz did not care about feelings nearly as much as patterns. And Ethan knew patterns. Years ago, inside Mid-American Bank's fraud division, he had spent entire weeks reconstructing timelines from tiny details people ignored. ATM timestamps, gas purchases, email metadata, storage receipts. Most lies collapsed under sequence. Not pressure, sequence. He stood and walked toward the motel window. Rain streaked across the parking lot beneath orange sodium lights. A semi-truck idled near the road engine, vibrating softly through the night. Ethan rubbed a hand across his jaw. Marissa had moved too fast. That bothered him most. Not because she locked him out, because she already knew exactly how to do it. At 12:57 a.m., his phone buzzed. A banking notification. Withdrawal alert, $48,000 transferred from joint checking. Ethan's eyes narrowed instantly. He logged into the account. Available balance, $3,912. Almost everything was gone. Transferred electronically less than 15 minutes earlier. He checked destination details. New external account added. Chase private client. Account holder hidden. Ethan sat down slowly at the edge of the motel bed. Then another notification arrived. Savings account withdrawal, $22,000. Gone. Not panic spending. Preparation. He looked at the wall for a long moment. Then he opened his contacts and scrolled to a number he had not called in nearly 8 years. Grace Whitman, attorney, Des Moines, former compliance counsel for Mid-American Bank. Ethan pressed call. 3 rings. A sleepy voice answered. Hello, Grace. It's Ethan Caldwell. A pause. Then immediate recognition. Jesus. Ethan, do you know what time it is? Yeah, you okay? Ethan looked toward the rain-covered motel window. My wife won $600 million and changed the locks tonight. Silence. Then Grace spoke again, fully awake now. Start from the beginning. For the next 20 minutes, Ethan explained everything in chronological order. Gas station, joint account purchase, 2 signatures, lottery numbers, lock change, money transfers. Grace interrupted only occasionally. Did you keep proof of purchase? Yes. Photo of the ticket? Yes. Witness's store clerk? Texts? Yes. Grace exhaled slowly. Good. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. She's going to try claiming it's separate property. She'll fail if the facts stay clean. If. That depends on whether you stay calm. Ethan almost smiled at that, not planning to throw bricks through windows. Good. Because right now, she's probably trying to create a narrative. The sentence landed heavily. Ethan looked back toward the dark, mulroom door. She used the Ring camera. Of course she did. Grace's keyboard clicked faintly through the phone. Listen carefully. She continued. Do not threaten her. Do not post online. Do not contact mutual friends about the ticket. Everything matters now. I know, you still think like an investigator. Sometimes, then think like one now. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. I already started organizing documents. Good. Tomorrow morning we file immediately. For divorce, for control. Grace's voice sharpened slightly. If she claims that prize before we establish competing ownership, things get uglier. Ethan stared at the motel carpet. Ugly had already arrived. Grace continued asking questions. What exactly did she say, through the camera, that the ticket was hers? Anything else? No. That's fine. Ethan rubbed tiredness from his face. She moved the money already. I expected that. You sound unsurprised. I've handled 3 cases involving sudden wealth, Grace said. Money speeds people up, especially when they were already halfway out the door. That sentence stayed with him after the call ended. Already halfway out the door. At 1:46 a.m., Ethan finally hung up. The motel heater rattled loudly beside the bed. He removed his work boots slowly and lined them neatly near the wall out of habit. Then he placed his phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling. His mind replayed details now with uncomfortable clarity. Marissa browsing homes constantly. Her saying she wanted to disappear. The quick drive after the lottery numbers, the immediate call to the news station, the rehearsed language through the Ring camera. Ethan realized something then. This was not a woman overwhelmed by sudden money. This was a woman accelerating a decision she had already made privately. The lottery ticket had not destroyed the marriage. It had removed the waiting period. At 2:13 a.m., Ethan sat up suddenly and grabbed his phone again. He reopened the photograph of the ticket, then zoomed even closer on the signatures. Marissa Caldwell, Ethan Caldwell, still there, still visible, still real. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over Des Moines, and somewhere across the city, Ethan knew Marissa was probably making calls, building plans, moving pieces quickly before daylight arrived. But for the first time that night, Ethan no longer felt locked out. He felt awake. By 7:15 a.m., the rain over Des Moines had turned into a cold gray mist that clung to windows and traffic lights. Marissa Caldwell sat inside a black SUV outside Denton and Vale Family Law, wearing oversized sunglasses and a cream wool coat that cost more than Ethan's monthly truck payment. Her phone rested in her lap beside a leather folder containing printed banking statements, screenshots, and handwritten notes. She did not look like someone overwhelmed by luck. She looked organized. The law office occupied the top floor of a renovated brick building near Locust Street. Frosted glass doors, polished concrete floors, espresso machine in the lobby. At 7:29 a.m., Marissa walked inside. A receptionist with sharp red nails greeted her immediately. "Mrs. Caldwell." Marissa nodded. "This way." She was escorted into a conference room overlooking downtown. Snow-colored clouds hung low above the skyline while commuters moved through wet streets below. Two attorneys entered minutes later. Richard Vale, Dana Mercer, both dressed in dark tailored suits. Richard carried a legal pad already filled with notes. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said smoothly. "First, congratulations." Marissa forced a small smile. "I need this handled fast." Richard sat across from her calmly. "Then we start with facts. Who purchased the ticket I did?" "With your money." A slight hesitation. "Yes." "Did your husband contribute?" "No." The lie came easily now. Dana opened a folder. "Is the ticket signed only by me?" Another lie. Marissa folded her hands tightly together to stop them from shaking. Richard noticed. "Mrs. Caldwell, I need absolute clarity. The moment this becomes public, your husband may claim marital interest. He doesn't deserve it. That isn't legally relevant." Marissa leaned forward. "He barely cared about the ticket. He fixes air conditioners and falls asleep on the couch every night. I built everything in that marriage." Richard's expression never changed. "How long have you considered divorce?" The question lingered in the room. Marissa looked toward the window briefly before answering. "A while." Dana slid papers across the table. "We can file emergency motions today. Temporary exclusive possession of the residence. Financial restraints. Protective occupancy if necessary." Marissa looked down at the paperwork. "Can I keep him away from the house if we establish instability or conflict risk. He scared me last night. Another sentence prepared in advance. Richard began writing immediately. Meanwhile, 20 minutes away, Ethan Caldwell climbed a metal ladder toward the rooftop HVAC system at Mercy One Medical Center. Wind cut across the roof hard enough to sting his eyes. His supervisor, Nate Holloway, shouted over the noise. "You look like hell. Didn't sleep." Nate handed him a wrench. "Well, hospital air handlers don't care about your feelings." Ethan almost smiled, faintly. Almost. He crouched beside the rooftop unit and removed the side panel carefully. The fan motor rattled loudly inside the housing. Normally, work quieted his mind. Not today. Every few minutes, his phone buzzed inside his jacket pocket. Notifications, emails, missed calls from unknown numbers, news stations already hunting the jackpot story. At 8:42 a.m., Grace Whitman called. Ethan stepped away from the unit and answered immediately. "You okay?" she asked. "Working. Good. Keep acting normal." "What's happening?" "I checked Polk County filings." Ethan waited. "She filed this morning." Not surprising. Still hearing it aloud, tightened something in his chest. "Divorce?" "Yes. Emergency motions, too." Ethan looked across the gray Des Moines skyline from the hospital rooftop. "What kind exclusive use of the marital residence? Asset protection requests? Preliminary financial separation?" She moved fast. She planned fast. Ethan remained silent. Grace continued. "She's also claiming the ticket is separate property." "Of course she is. Did you threaten her at any point?" "No." "Good. Because her filing references emotional intimidation." That finally made Ethan laugh quietly. Short, empty. The wind whipped hard across the rooftop. "I changed furnace filters for 12 hours yesterday," he said. Not exactly terrifying behavior. "Truth matters less than documentation." "At first," Grace replied. "That's why we move now?" Ethan crouched against the rooftop unit. "What do you need from me?" "Everything." By 10:03 a.m., Ethan sat inside Grace Whitman's office near Polk County Courthouse. The office looked almost unchanged from years earlier. Same dark wood shelves. Same framed University of Iowa law diploma. Same faint smell of coffee and printer toner. Grace wore a charcoal blazer and rectangular reading glasses balanced low on her nose while reviewing Ethan's documents one by one. "Photo timestamp checks out," she said. She slid the phone back toward him. "The signatures are visible enough, very." Ethan handed over printed bank statements from the Motel Business Center. Grace reviewed the Hawkeye Fuel Mart charge. "Joint account," she said. "Yes?" "Excellent. Not emotionally excellent. Legally excellent." Grace organized everything into labeled folders with frightening speed. Proof of purchase. Joint financial records. Text communications. Photographic evidence. Witness identification. Ethan watched quietly. "Did she already contact the lottery office?" he asked. "Probably. What happens if she claims it before we file?" Grace looked directly at him. "Then we make everyone's lives harder." She stood and walked toward her assistant's desk. "Karen, I need emergency filing priority." Karen nodded immediately. Grace turned back toward Ethan. We're requesting temporary injunction against unilateral claim or transfer of lottery proceeds. Ethan rubbed tiredness from his face. She emptied the accounts already. I saw she took 70 grand overnight. Grace sat again. That actually helps us. How? It establishes intent to conceal marital assets. Ethan leaned back silently. The old investigator part of his brain kept building timelines automatically. Lottery announced. Money transferred. Locks changed. Emergency divorce filing. Narrative construction. Every move connected. Grace tapped a pen lightly against the desk. Tell me exactly what happened at the door last night. Ethan repeated the exchange word for word. Grace typed while listening. She used the Ring camera intentionally, she said. I know. She wanted recorded evidence of you appearing angry or unstable. I didn't give her any. That may save you millions. At 11:17, Ethan's phone buzzed with another banking alert. New external transfer attempt detected. This time, the bank had flagged it. Grace took the phone from his hand and read carefully. She's trying to move more. Can we stop it? Not instantly. Grace picked up her office phone immediately. Within minutes, she contacted First Horizon Credit Union and formally notified them of pending marital litigation involving disputed high-value assets. Ethan listened quietly while she spoke in calm, legal language that sounded almost surgical. By noon, Grace had filed emergency motions electronically with Polk County Family Court. Time-stamped, official, real. When she finally leaned back in her chair, Ethan noticed exhaustion around her eyes. This is going to become ugly publicly, she said. I figured. Media attention, financial investigators, maybe national coverage if the amount gets out. Ethan stared at the folders stacked across her desk. What if I don't want any of this? Grace studied him carefully before answering. Doesn't matter now. Outside her office window, courthouse flags snapped sharply in the cold wind. Ethan suddenly remembered something small. Lenny saw us sign the ticket. Grace looked up immediately. The cashier? Yes. Good. And there's probably surveillance footage. Grace's expression sharpened. From the gas station. Yes, she immediately began writing notes again. Excellent. Ethan sat quietly while she worked. The room filled with printer sounds and keyboard clicks. Then Grace stopped suddenly and looked at him over the top of her glasses. One more thing. Do not underestimate how quickly money changes alliances. Ethan nodded once. Too late for that warning. At 1:08 p.m., Grace's office phone rang. Karen answered outside. A moment later, she stepped inside with a tense expression. Grace, she said carefully. Iowa Lottery called back. Grace stood immediately. What did they say? Karen looked toward Ethan first. Mrs. Caldwell scheduled a private claim appointment for tomorrow morning. The room went silent. Grace slowly held out her hand toward Ethan. Give me your phone. Ethan handed it over. Grace reopened the photograph of the ticket, zoomed directly onto the two signatures, and stared at them for several seconds. Then she smiled for the first time all day. Cold, precise. "Good," she said quietly. "Let's make sure she doesn't walk in there alone." The Iowa sky looked colorless the next morning. A thin layer of frost covered parked cars outside Polk County Courthouse, while people hurried along sidewalks, holding coffee cups and folded newspapers against the wind. Ethan Caldwell sat inside Grace Whitman's dark blue Audi, reviewing documents one final time. Neither of them spoke much. The folder resting in Ethan's lap contained his entire marriage reduced into paper evidence. Bank statements, text messages, transaction logs, photographs, timelines. Grace adjusted her glasses while scanning emails on her phone. She moved the appointment earlier, she said. "What time?" 10:30. Ethan looked toward the courthouse steps outside. "And we file." "Before then, we already filed electronically last night. Today we make noise in the right places." Grace turned the engine off. For the next few hours, she continued, "Your job is simple. Stay quiet." "Exactly." They entered the courthouse at 8:06 a.m. The building smelled faintly of old stone, wet coats, and printer toner. Security officers barely looked up while attorneys moved briskly through metal detectors, carrying leather briefcases and coffee. Grace walked quickly toward the clerk's office. Ethan followed silently. He noticed how differently people behaved around lawyers compared to ordinary conversations. No wasted movement, no emotional language, just sequence and timing. Inside the clerk's office, Grace handed over emergency filing confirmations and requested immediate judicial review due to disputed, high-value marital assets. The clerk glanced at the case file twice. "Lottery, claim." "Yes," Grace said. The clerk raised her eyebrows slightly. "Big one. 600 million. That got everyone's attention. Within minutes, the paperwork moved faster. At 8:43 a.m., Grace and Ethan sat inside a narrow conference room, across from Judge Harold Mercer's judicial assistant. Emergency hearings usually took days. Money changed that, especially money large enough to create national headlines. The assistant reviewed the filings carefully. "Mrs. Caldwell intends to claim sole ownership." "Yes," Grace answered, "despite joint purchase, joint signatures, and marital funds." The assistant nodded slowly. "Do you have supporting documentation?" Grace slid the folder across the table. "Extensive documentation." Ethan watched the woman review the ticket photograph. She zoomed in directly on the signatures. Marissa Caldwell. Ethan Caldwell. Her expression shifted immediately. "That complicates things," she murmured. "Exactly," Grace said. By 9:15 a.m., temporary notices had been electronically transmitted to the Iowa Lottery Authority. Pending ownership dispute. Potential marital asset litigation. Request to suspend unilateral claim disbursement. Not a victory, but a brake pedal. Outside the courthouse, reporters had already begun gathering near the entrance after rumors leaked online overnight. Someone had talked. Maybe the law office. Maybe the lottery office. Maybe Marissa herself. Ethan kept his head down while walking toward Grace's car. A reporter spotted him instantly. "Mr. Caldwell." Another voice followed. "Is it true your wife locked you out?" After winning the jackpot, camera lenses turned toward him. Microphones appeared. Ethan kept walking. No expression, no comment. Inside the car, Grace shut the doors hard. "Good," she said. "You don't want to say anything." "Not yet." Grace started the engine. "People think silence means weakness," she continued. "Courtrooms usually disagree." At 9:52 a.m., they arrived outside the Iowa Lottery headquarters in Clive. The building looked surprisingly ordinary for a place handling $600 million. Clean brick exterior, American flag snapping in the wind. 3 local news vans parked near the entrance. Ethan noticed Marissa's white Range Rover immediately. New vehicle. Temporary plates. Purchased fast. Grace noticed it too. "She's already spending, psychologically," she said quietly. They entered through the main lobby. Inside, the atmosphere felt tense, but controlled. Employees moved carefully between offices, while security guards watched the growing media crowd outside through glass doors. A lottery representative approached. "Can I help you?" Grace handed over business cards and court notices. "I'm Attorney Grace Whitman, representing Ethan Caldwell regarding disputed ownership of the current Powerball ticket scheduled for review this morning." The representative's polite smile disappeared almost instantly. One moment. They were escorted into a waiting room near the administrative offices. Televisions mounted on the walls silently replayed lottery graphics, while scrolling headlines discussed the massive jackpot winner, still unidentified publicly. At 10:11 a.m., Marissa arrived. She entered with Richard Vail and Dana Mercer beside her. Marissa wore a white designer coat and dark sunglasses despite being indoors. Her posture stayed straight until she saw Ethan sitting calmly beside Grace. Then she froze briefly. Just half a second, but Ethan saw it. Richard Vail recovered first. "Grace," he said evenly. "Richard." The 2 attorneys shook hands without warmth. Marissa removed her sunglasses slowly. Her eyes locked onto Ethan. "You followed me?" Grace answered before Ethan could speak. "No." "We protected his legal interest." Richard gave a thin smile. "My client purchased that ticket independently." Grace opened the folder immediately and slid the enlarged ticket photograph across the table. Richard's smile faded. 2 signatures, clear as daylight. Marissa looked toward Ethan sharply. Ethan said nothing. Richard adjusted his tie. "Well," he said, carefully, "that introduces additional discussion." "Not discussion," Grace replied. "Ownership." A lottery compliance officer entered moments later. "Good morning," she said nervously. "We've received notice of pending litigation." Richard stood. "My client is still prepared to proceed with claim verification." Grace remained seated. "Under disputed ownership conditions." The compliance officer hesitated. "That is under review." Marissa finally spoke directly to Ethan. "You're really doing this?" His expression never changed. "Doing what you know exactly what." Ethan looked at her for several seconds before answering quietly. "You locked me out of my own house." Marissa crossed her arms tightly. "That ticket was mine." You signed it. Her jaw tightened instantly. The compliance officer interrupted carefully. We need to inspect the physical ticket now. Marissa slowly removed a sealed envelope from her purse. Even from across the room, Ethan noticed how tightly she held it. Fear again. Not guilt. Fear of losing control. The officer placed the ticket inside a transparent evidence sleeve and carried it toward a side conference room. Everyone followed. Inside, bright overhead lights reflected against polished tables, while cameras mounted in ceiling corners recorded continuously. The officer laid the ticket flat beneath a document scanner. Another employee leaned closer. "Can you zoom further?" Grace asked. The screen enlarged the bottom section of the ticket. The room became completely silent. There they were, two names, Marissa Caldwell, Ethan Caldwell. The signatures filled the monitor large enough for everyone to see clearly. Richard Vale exhaled quietly through his nose. Dana Mercer looked down at her notes immediately. Marissa's face drained pale beneath the fluorescent lights. "That doesn't prove ownership," she said quickly. Grace answered instantly. "No. Combined with joint payment records, text communications, witness testimony, and photographic timestamps, it proves quite a lot." The compliance officer looked visibly uncomfortable now. Richard spoke carefully. "My client disputes the circumstances surrounding those signatures." "Excellent," Grace said calmly. "Then discovery will be entertaining." Ethan watched Marissa closely. For the first time since this started, her confidence cracked visibly. Not because of emotion, because facts had shape, and shape was difficult to argue with. The compliance officer cleared her throat. "Until ownership issues are resolved, Iowa Lottery may need to suspend immediate disbursement authorization." Marissa turned sharply. "You can't do that." "We absolutely can under pending legal dispute." Richard placed a hand lightly on Marissa's arm. "Let's stay calm." But Marissa wasn't looking at the lottery officials anymore. She was staring at Ethan, trying to understand why the quiet HVAC technician she had locked outside 48 hours earlier suddenly looked impossible to move. Ethan met her eyes steadily. No anger, no triumph, just patience. Then another lottery employee hurried into the room, holding printed documents. "There's more," he said carefully. Everyone turned toward him. He handed the papers directly to the compliance officer. The woman reviewed them once, then again. Her eyes lifted slowly toward Marissa. "These are official notices from Polk County Family Court," she said. "Temporary injunction request regarding all jackpot distributions pending judicial review." The room fell silent again. Grace folded her hands calmly on the table. Then she looked directly at Marissa for the first time all morning. "And now," she said quietly, "nobody touches the money." The news broke before noon. Not the winner's identity, the dispute. By 12:14 p.m., local stations across Iowa were already running headlines about a married couple fighting over a $600 million Powerball ticket. Outside Iowa Lottery headquarters, reporters crowded against metal barricades, while camera crews adjusted lenses toward the glass entrance. The temperature had dropped sharply. Wind pushed dry leaves across the parking lot in restless circles. Inside Conference Room B, nobody looked comfortable anymore. Marissa Caldwell sat rigidly beside Richard Vale, while Dana Mercer whispered quietly into her ear. The lottery officials had paused the verification process completely until their legal department finished reviewing the injunction filings. Ethan remained seated across the table beside Grace Whitman, still quiet, still watching. A compliance officer finally cleared her throat. Until ownership. Determination is clarified. She said carefully, Iowa Lottery cannot authorize individual disbursement. Marissa leaned forward immediately. That's ridiculous. The officer kept her voice even. Mrs. Caldwell, your husband's name appears on the signed ticket. He forced me to sign it. The sentence landed hard in the room. Ethan didn't react outwardly, but Grace did. She slowly folded her glasses and placed them on the table. That is a serious allegation, she said. It's true, Marissa replied quickly. He handled all the financial stuff in our marriage. He pressured me constantly. Richard Vale glanced sideways at Marissa briefly. Not disagreement. Concern. Grace opened another folder. Interesting, she said calmly. Because we obtained preliminary footage from Hawkeye Fuel Mart 20 minutes ago. Now, Richard's expression changed completely. Marissa turned toward him sharply. What footage? Grace slid a flash drive across the table toward the compliance officer. The security system recorded the ticket purchase. The officer hesitated. Are we authorized to review this? You are absolutely authorized to evaluate evidence relating to disputed ownership. Richard immediately stood. We object to any informal review outside discovery procedure. Grace looked up at him. You object because you already know what's on it. Silence. The compliance officer exchanged nervous looks spiked with another employee before plugging the drive into a laptop connected to the room monitor. The grainy gas station footage appeared on screen. Timestamp, October 14th, 9:16 p.m. Hawkeye Fuel Mart. Ethan watched himself on video standing beside Marissa at the counter beneath fluorescent lights. Lenny Brooks handed over the ticket. Marissa signed first, then Ethan. No pressure, no force, both smiling casually. Then came Lenny's voice through the surveillance audio. Split it fair if you win? Marissa laughed on screen. Deal. The room became very still. Richard slowly sat back down. Dana Mercer closed her notebook quietly. Marissa stared at the frozen image on the monitor without blinking. Ethan noticed something then. This was the first time she truly understood she might not control the story anymore. Not with emotion, not with speed, not with money. Facts were beginning to arrive faster than she could reshape them. Grace spoke gently now. Would you still like to maintain the coercion allegation? Marissa's eyes flicked toward Ethan, cold, sharp, but uncertain now. You planned this, she said quietly. Ethan answered for the first time in several minutes. No, I just kept records. That sentence stayed hanging in the room long after he finished speaking. The compliance officer removed the flash drive carefully. "We are officially suspending claim processing pending judicial review," she announced. Marissa stood immediately. "You can't freeze $600 million because of a marital argument." Grace corrected her instantly. "No, they're freezing it because the ownership evidence is shared." Richard rubbed a hand across his mouth before finally speaking. "We'll pursue expedited hearings." "So will we," Grace replied. Outside the building, the media crowd had doubled. The moment the conference room doors opened, voices exploded across the lobby. "Mrs. Caldwell! Is the ticket disputed, Mr. Caldwell? Are you suing your wife?" Flashbulbs fired rapidly. Security guards struggled to maintain space near the entrance. Marissa froze briefly beneath the sudden attention. Ethan noticed how quickly her breathing changed. The public pressure had arrived much sooner than she expected. Richard stepped in front of her immediately. "No comment," he repeated firmly. But reporters kept shouting questions. "Did you lock your husband out after winning? Is the jackpot on hold? Did both of you sign the ticket?" One question cut through the noise, sharper than the others. "Mrs. Caldwell, is it true you transferred joint funds hours before filing divorce?" Marissa's face changed instantly. Only for a second, but cameras caught it. Ethan saw the exact moment she realized the financial transfers were no longer private. Grace leaned closer to him while they walked. "Good," she murmured. "You wanted this public?" Ethan asked quietly. "No, but now that it is public, truth moves faster." They finally reached Grace's Audi through the crowd. Inside the car, the silence felt heavy after the shouting outside. Ethan loosened his tie slightly. "I hate this." Grace started the engine. Most decent people do. They drove through downtown Des Moines while radio stations already discussed the story live. A host called it the nastiest lottery battle Iowa has ever seen. Another speculated about hidden prenuptial agreements. A third openly questioned whether Marissa had attempted financial concealment. Grace lowered the volume. She's going to escalate now. How public sympathy. Ethan stared through the windshield. She already started. Yes, but now she's losing control of the timeline. At 2:37 p.m., Ethan's phone buzzed repeatedly. Text messages from coworkers, friends he hadn't spoken to in years. Unknown numbers. Even his supervisor, Nate, sent a message. Brother, what the hell is happening? Ethan didn't answer any of them. Instead, he opened social media quietly. Marissa's face already filled local news pages. Beautiful real estate agent wins jackpot amid ugly divorce battle. Comments flooded underneath. Some defended Ethan. Others mocked him. A few called him abusive without evidence. One local blogger referred to him as the bitter ex trying to steal his wife's miracle. Grace glanced toward his phone. Stop reading comments. I know. They're not evidence. They're weather. That evening, Ethan checked into a different hotel near West Des Moines after reporters discovered Prairie Lantern Inn. The front desk clerk recognized him immediately. "You're the lottery guy," she whispered. Ethan simply handed over his ID Room 811. Higher floor. Quieter. Inside the room, he finally removed his boots and sat heavily near the window overlooking the interstate. Traffic lights stretched endlessly through the darkening city. $600 million sat frozen somewhere between lawyers' court filings and state regulations. And somehow, Ethan still felt less exhausted by the money than by the betrayal wrapped around it. At 7:11 p.m., Grace called again. "We received confirmation from the lottery legal department," she said immediately. "What kind?" "They officially acknowledged disputed ownership." Ethan exhaled slowly. "That's good. It prevents unilateral payout." He rubbed tiredness from his eyes. "What happens next?" "Now we start proving patterns, meaning financial transfers, intent, communications, asset concealment." Ethan leaned back against the hotel chair. "You really think she planned all this before the ticket?" Grace paused briefly. "Yes." The answer came too fast to be uncertain. "What makes you think that?" "Because nobody changes locks, empties, accounts, hires attorneys and contacts, media in under 12 hours, unless they already built the exit route." Ethan looked out at the interstate below. Headlights moved steadily through the darkness like silent rivers. He remembered Marissa browsing expensive homes months earlier, talking about disappearing, taking private calls outside, staying late at the real estate office more often. The signs looked obvious now. Maybe they always had been. Grace interrupted his thoughts. "There's something else. What we subpoenaed, additional banking activity tied to the joint accounts." Ethan sat upright slightly, and Grace's voice lowered. "There are transfers we haven't seen before. How much not huge individually, but repeated." Ethan felt the old investigator instinct wake up immediately. "How far back?" 8 months. Silence settled heavily between them. Then Grace added one final sentence. "And Ethan, one of the receiving names appears repeatedly." He stared at the city lights outside. What name? Grace turned a page somewhere on her desk. "Bryce Harlan." Ethan's expression finally changed. Not anger, recognition, because Bryce Harlan was not a financial advisor, and he was not a lawyer. Bryce Harlan was Marissa's ex-boyfriend. Bryce Harlan had once sold luxury boats on Lake Okoboji and wore cologne expensive enough to announce itself before he entered a room. Ethan remembered him immediately. Tall, perfect teeth, loud confidence. The kind of man who shook hands too long. Marissa had dated Bryce briefly before meeting Ethan 13 years earlier. She used to joke that Bryce cared more about mirrors than people. Now his name sat inside financial transfer records connected to Ethan's marriage. At 7:42 a.m. the next morning, Ethan sat across from Grace Whitman inside her office conference room while she spread printed banking records across the table. Small transfers. $2,500. $4,800. $1,900. Always below thresholds that triggered automatic scrutiny. Always spaced apart carefully. Recipient: BH Consulting Group, LLC. Grace tapped one page. Started 8 months ago. Ethan scanned the dates and silently. The pattern was clean. Too clean. These came in from our joint account. Yes. How much total? Just under 90,000. Ethan leaned back slowly. $90,000 gone in fragments, while he spent weekends repairing furnace units and replacing leaking ductwork across central Iowa. What's BH Consulting? He asked. Grace slid another document across the table. Registered LLC in Illinois. Ethan studied the paperwork. Owner Bryce Harlan. Consulting for what? Grace gave a small, humorless smile. That's the interesting part. The company barely exists. Outside the office windows downtown Des Moines moved beneath cold sunlight and drifting traffic. Normal life continued, while Ethan's marriage quietly collapsed under paperwork. He stared at the transfers again. Not rage, recognition. This was how financial concealment worked when someone thought they were smarter than scrutiny. Small movements, low visibility, repeated over time. Grace watched him carefully. You okay? Yes. You don't sound surprised. Ethan rubbed his thumb along the edge of the paper. I used to investigate this exact behavior, and people almost always hide money emotionally before they hide it strategically. Grace nodded slowly. She was preparing an exit. At 9:18 a.m., Grace filed additional discovery motions requesting expanded financial disclosures and preservation orders tied to Bryce Harlan and BH Consulting Group. Then she made another call. Hawkeye Fuel Mart agreed to provide full surveillance archives, she told Ethan afterward, including parking lot footage. Why the parking lot? I want the entire timeline preserved. Ethan understood immediately. No gaps, no room for reinterpretation later. By noon, the media coverage had become national. Cable news banners referred to the case as the Powerball Marriage War. Online articles used photographs of Marissa outside the lottery headquarters wearing white designer sunglasses, while Ethan appeared mostly in grainy images, carrying his toolbox. The contrast created a narrative almost automatically. Beautiful real estate agent, quiet, blue-collar husband, sudden betrayal, massive money. America loves simple stories. Grace hated simple stories. At 1:03 p.m., she walked into the conference room carrying another folder. Found something. Ethan looked up. The house security logs. Our house. Yes. She opened printed records from the ring system tied to the Ashworth Road property. Door access timestamps, motion detection, code changes. Grace pointed to one entry. Lock settings updated 10:58 p.m. Ethan stared at the time. The winning numbers had aired around 11 o'clock. She changed the locks before I even got home. Correct. Another entry sat beneath it. New access code created 11:02 p.m. Grace folded her arms. That matters, because it showed sequence again, not emotional reaction, preparation. Marissa saw the numbers, changed the locks immediately, then waited for Ethan to arrive. Ethan sat quietly for several seconds. She already decided. Yes. Grace lowered her voice slightly, and judges noticed timing. At 2:44 p.m., Ethan finally returned to Ashworth Road with a police standby escort arranged through Grace's office so he could retrieve remaining personal property. The neighborhood looked different now. 2 news vans parked near the corner. Neighbors pretending not to stare. A woman walking her dog slowed visibly when Ethan stepped out of the patrol car. The front door opened, and before he reached the porch, Marissa stood there wearing dark jeans and a cream sweater. No sunglasses today. Her expression looked colder without them. The officer spoke first. Mr. Caldwell has authorization to collect personal belongings peacefully. Marissa crossed her arms. You needed police now? No, Ethan answered quietly. Documentation. That irritated her more. He walked inside carefully. The house smelled faintly of expensive candles and fresh paint cleaner. Marissa had already removed framed photos from the hallway walls. Empty nail holes dotted the paint. The marriage was disappearing physically now. Ethan moved room by room calmly. Tools from the garage, old family photo albums, tax records, his mother's jewelry box. When he opened the bedroom closet, half the shelves sat empty already. Marissa leaned against the doorway, watching him. You really want to drag this through court? Ethan folded shirts into a duffel bag. You emptied accounts. You're acting innocent. He looked up slowly. I haven't lied yet. That hit harder than shouting would have. Marissa's jaw tightened. You think you deserve half because you signed a piece of paper. Ethan zipped the bag carefully. I deserve what the law says belongs to both of us. The law? She repeated bitterly. Yes. She laughed once under her breath. That's all you care about now. Ethan looked around the half-empty bedroom. No. But it's what survives after trust dies. For a moment, Marissa said nothing. Then her phone buzzed. She checked the screen quickly and stepped into the hallway to answer. Ethan continued packing quietly. When he entered the garage minutes later, he stopped. Something was missing. A cedar storage chest near the back wall. His mother's. Ethan looked into the empty concrete space where it had sat for years. Inside that chest were old military medals, photographs, and jewelry, passed down through 3 generations. He walked back toward the kitchen. Where's the cedar chest? Marissa didn't answer. Immediately. Then I moved it. Where storage? What storage? That's not your concern. Ethan stared at her. It belonged to my mother. She's not dead. That chest isn't yours. Marissa grabbed her coffee cup aggressively. You want to inventory every spoon now, too. Ethan remained still. Where is it? No. The officer standing near the doorway shifted uncomfortably. Ethan noticed. So did Marissa. She softened her tone immediately. I just needed space cleared. Again. Prepared language. Measured. Language. Everything sounded designed for witnesses now. Ethan nodded once. Okay. He carried another bag toward the truck. As he loaded it, a neighbor across the street raised a phone, slightly recording. The whole block had become spectators. Inside the garage again, Ethan crouched near a shelf gathering old financial binders. Then he noticed something small near the trash can. A shipping receipt, partially crumpled. He unfolded it carefully. Midwest Secure Storage Unit B 14. Recipient Bryce Harlan. Ethan stared at the paper without moving. Storage rental initiated 2 days before the lottery drawing. 2 days. Not after. before. His eyes narrowed slightly. The timing mattered more than the name. Because people fleeing suddenly did not usually organize a hidden storage units in advance. People planning exits did. The officer approached quietly. "You good?" Ethan folded the receipt carefully into his jacket pocket. "Yeah." Outside, the sky over Des Moines had turned darker again. Wind pushed dead leaves across the driveway, while reporters waited near the corner, hoping for another dramatic scene. They wouldn't get one. Ethan loaded the final bag into his truck slowly. Marissa stood on the porch watching. The same porch where she had locked him out 3 nights earlier. For a second, neither spoke. Then Ethan closed the truck door. "You already planned to leave before the ticket," he said calmly. A flicker crossed her face. Tiny, but real. Then she recovered instantly. "You're paranoid." Ethan reached into his pocket and touched the folded suffrage receipt without removing it. No anger moved through him now, only structure. Because suddenly, the timeline was becoming visible. And timelines were very difficult to kill once they started connecting themselves. 3 days later, Marissa Caldwell sat beneath studio lights inside the offices of Iowa Live News, wearing a soft blue blazer and carefully measured sadness. The interview aired at 6 p.m. By 6:07, clips had already spread across TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. "I never wanted this to become public," Marissa said softly into the camera. "I just wanted peace." The anchor nodded sympathetically. "And your husband is contesting ownership." Marissa lowered her eyes at exactly the right moment. He changed after the ticket. Ethan watched the interview alone inside his hotel room near West Des Moines, while cold takeout Chinese food sat untouched beside him. The television glow reflected faintly across the dark window behind him. He became controlling. Marissa continued, "I honestly felt unsafe." Ethan muted the television, not because the accusation shocked him anymore, because he recognized performance structure. Pause before emotional phrases. Downward eye movement. Controlled breathing. She had rehearsed this. His phone vibrated repeatedly across the nightstand. Messages from coworkers, former classmates, even distant relatives. Some supportive, some uncertain. One simply asked, "Did you really threaten her?" Ethan placed the phone face down. Across town, Grace Whitman was already preparing responses. At 7:12 p.m., she called. "I assume you saw it." "Yes. Good news?" Ethan almost laughed. "There's good news. She overperformed." Ethan frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "She made factual claims." Grace's voice stayed calm and clinical. "Emotional interviews are dangerous when discoverable evidence exists." Ethan leaned back in the chair. "She said I scared her." "Yes. Which means now she may need to prove it." Outside the hotel window, headlights moved steadily through light rain on Interstate 35. Grace continued, "We're requesting all communications between her legal team and media contacts." "You can do that in certain circumstances." Ethan rubbed his eyes tiredly. "This whole thing feels insane." "It's about to get more insane." At 8:03 a.m. The next morning, Ethan arrived at Grace's office, carrying coffee and a cardboard box of old financial binders recovered from the garage. Grace already stood at the conference table, surrounded by printed screenshots. "She posted again last night," she said. Ethan glanced at the papers. Marissa's social media account. A black and white photo. Caption: "Sometimes survival means leaving quietly before someone destroys you." 38,000 likes overnight. Thousands of comments. Most from strangers who knew nothing except the version she presented. Grace pointed toward another page. She also gave an anonymous statement to a syndicated outlet. Ethan read silently. Sources close to the couple describe Ethan Caldwell as emotionally unstable and obsessed with controlling the jackpot. Grace folded her arms. She's building narrative pressure before depositions begin. Ethan sat down heavily. Does public opinion matter? Not legally. Grace paused. But it affects settlement pressure, jury pools, media framing, and reputation. Ethan stared at the papers. For years, he had repaired ventilation systems in schools, hospitals, warehouses, and apartment buildings without anyone noticing him. Now strangers online debated whether he was abusive. The speed of it felt unreal. Grace slid another document toward him. Fortunately, she said quietly, "Facts are moving too." It was a forensic timeline. Ring lock changes, bank transfers, lottery timestamps, media contacts, all aligned within hours after the winning numbers appeared. Ethan studied the sequence silently. "It looks bad," he said. "For her, yes." At 10:41 a.m., Grace received a new document production from Midwest Secure Storage. Unit B-14, registered under Bryce Harlan. Access logs attached. Ethan leaned forward immediately. Any activity, Grace scanned the pages. Multiple visits. By Bryce? Yes. She flipped another page. And one visitor authorization added under Marissa Caldwell. The room went quiet. Not proof of an affair. Not yet. But proof of coordination. Grace tapped the document. Storage rental began before the lottery drawing. I know. That timing matters more than people realize. Ethan nodded slowly. Because preparation created intent. And intent changed how courts viewed everything afterward. At noon, Ethan drove alone toward the storage facility on the industrial edge of West Des Moines, not to confront anyone, just to see it. Midwest Secure Storage sat behind chain-link fencing beside a trucking yard. Gray concrete buildings stretched beneath cloudy skies, while security cameras rotated slowly above the gates. He parked across the street near a tire shop. Unit B-14 was impossible to see directly from there. Still, Ethan waited. Old instincts. Observe first. At 12:36 p.m., a black Mercedes SUV entered through the security gate. Bryce Harlan stepped out minutes later. Even from a distance, Ethan recognized him immediately. Still tall, still polished, camel-colored coat, expensive watch. Hair perfectly styled despite the wind. Bryce carried himself like a man permanently posing for photographs. Ethan watched him unlock one of the interior units, B-14. Then Marissa appeared from the passenger side. She wore sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low. Not hiding from Bryce, hiding from cameras. Ethan remained inside the truck silently while they disappeared into the storage corridor together. He checked the time. 12:39 p.m. Then he took photographs through the windshield. Time stamped. Clear enough. After 15 minutes, Bryce exited carrying 2 banker boxes toward the SUV. Marissa followed holding Ethan's mother's cedar chest. Ethan's jaw tightened for the first time all morning. Not rage. Something colder. Recognition again. She had moved his family property into another man's storage unit before the lottery even exploded publicly. Bryce loaded the chest carefully into the Mercedes. Then he kissed Marissa briefly beside the rear passenger door. Quick, casual, practiced. Ethan watched without moving. No dramatic confrontation rose inside him. No urge to run across the street screaming. Because suddenly, the emotional part of the betrayal looked smaller than the logistical part. This had been running quietly for months, maybe longer. He took more photographs, then drove away. At 2:17 p.m., Grace reviewed the images inside her office. Well, she said softly, that simplifies several things. Ethan sat across from her silently. You okay? She asked again. Yes. But his voice sounded distant now. Grace studied the photographs closely. The chest matters. So does the affair? Yes. But concealment of marital property matters more financially. Ethan nodded once. That was true. Courts punished hidden assets harder than hidden relationships. Grace leaned back in her chair. Did you confront them? No. Good. She organized the photographs into another evidence folder. Asset transfer activity. The labels were beginning to stack high across the conference table. At 4:52 p.m., another problem arrived. Grace's assistant entered, carrying printed screenshots from social media. A new post had gone viral, this time from a local influencer who claimed to know Marissa personally. The post described Ethan as a bitter HVAC guy trying to take money from the woman who actually bought the ticket. The comments underneath were uglier now. Gold digger, manipulator, abuser, parasite. Grace barely looked at the screen before pushing it aside. Noise, she said. Ethan stared at the words longer than he should have, then quietly. My mother's going to see this. Grace's expression softened slightly for the first time that day. She knows you. That doesn't stop humiliation. Silence settled between them. Outside the office windows, late afternoon sunlight faded across downtown buildings. Grace finally spoke again. Ethan listened carefully. He looked up. People online think emotion wins truth. She tapped the evidence folders stacked across the table. Courtrooms usually prefer receipts. At 6:18 p.m., Ethan returned to the hotel, carrying a grocery bag and fresh copies of court filings. The hallway television near the elevators played another interview about the lottery battle. He barely glanced at it anymore. Inside his room, he set the grocery bag down and noticed a white envelope slipped beneath the door. No stamp. No return address. Ethan picked it up carefully. Inside was a single printed photograph. Marissa and Bryce together outside Midwest Secure Storage, taken from a much closer angle than Ethan's own photos. On the back, typed in black ink, You're not the only one watching them. Ethan stared at the message for several long seconds. Then his phone rang. Grace. He answered immediately. Before he could speak, Grace's voice came sharp through the line. Ethan. She said we may have another problem. Ethan closed the hotel room curtains before speaking. What kind of problem? Grace's voice stayed low and controlled through the phone. Bryce Harlan retained counsel this afternoon. Ethan looked again at the anonymous photograph lying on the desk beside the lamp. That was fast. No Grace replied. That was prepared. The sentence settled heavily into the room. Ethan sat slowly at the edge of the bed. What does Bryce need a lawyer for? Because we filed motions connected to the storage unit and financial transfers, and his attorney just informed us the contents of Unit B14 may contain personal property unrelated to marital proceedings. Ethan stared toward the dark hotel window. Translation, they were scared. Grace continued. I think they're trying to move things before discovery expands. Ethan's old investigator instincts clicked into place immediately. Can they? Not legally, but practically. A pause. Yes. Ethan rubbed his jaw slowly. What do we do? Grace answered without hesitation. We get there first. At 7:42 a.m., the next morning, cold fog hung low over the industrial district outside West Des Moines. Ethan parked beside Grace's Audi near Midwest Secure Storage, while trucks groaned along the highway nearby. The facility manager, a nervous man named Colin Reeves, met them inside the front office. We received your preservation request, Colin said carefully, but unless there's a court order, I can't open customer units. Grace handed over additional paperwork. You don't need to open it, she said calmly. You only need to preserve surveillance footage and access logs. Colin adjusted his glasses nervously. There's been activity. Ethan looked up immediately. What kind? Colin checked the computer screen. Unit B14 was accessed twice overnight. Grace and Ethan exchanged a glance. What times? Grace asked. 11:48 p.m. and 3:11 a.m. Too late for normal storage behavior. Too early for innocent behavior. Grace leaned slightly forward. Do you still have exterior camera footage? Yes. Good. Preserve for all of it immediately. At 8:15 a.m., they reviewed security footage inside the storage office. Black and white video showed Bryce Harlan's Mercedes entering the gate shortly before midnight. Another vehicle followed behind. A dark SUV. Ethan recognized instantly. Marissa's Range Rover. The footage showed them carrying multiple boxes out of B14 during both visits. Fast movement. Repeated trips. Urgency. Then the second video appeared. 3:11 a.m. This time, Bryce arrived alone. He exited carrying a silver hard drive case and 2 banker boxes. Grace paused the footage. Interesting. Ethan narrowed his eyes slightly. They're cleaning records. Looks like it. The manager cleared his throat quietly. There's something else. He opened another screen. Rental records. Grace studied them carefully. The original lease agreement for B14 appeared on the monitor. Start date October 12th. 2 days before the lottery drawing. Then Ethan noticed another name listed under authorized access users. Not Marissa. Someone else. Claire Benton. Marissa's co-worker from the real estate office. The same friend she claimed to meet the morning after the jackpot. Grace leaned back slowly. This keeps getting bigger. At 9:37 a.m., Grace filed emergency motions requesting immediate asset preservation orders related to B14, Bryce Harlan, BH Consulting Group, and any associated storage properties. Meanwhile, the media pressure continued growing. By now, national outlets had picked up the story fully. One cable segment referred to Ethan as the husband fighting for his share. Another described Marissa as a woman trapped in a collapsing marriage before sudden wealth changed everything. Everyone built stories from fragments. Nobody had the whole picture yet. At 11:02 a.m., Ethan finally returned to work for the first time in nearly a week. Mercy One Medical Center still needed rooftop systems repaired, regardless of lottery wars. Nate Holloway met him near the maintenance elevator. "You sure you should be here?" "Yes." Nate handed him a work order clipboard. "You're famous now." Unfortunately, Nate hesitated briefly. "For what it's worth, nobody here believes that TV stuff." Ethan looked at him quietly. "Thanks." The hospital rooftop felt strangely peaceful compared to courtrooms and media cameras. Cold wind, mechanical noise, simple systems with logical failures. Ethan opened an HVAC panel and focused on wiring diagnostics while downtown Des Moines stretched gray beneath him. For 20 minutes, his mind almost settled. Then his phone buzzed. "Grace." He answered immediately. "We found the storage transfer inventory, how Claire Benton used company email to coordinate movers." Ethan sat back against the rooftop unit. "What kind of inventory?" Grace exhaled slowly. "Jewelry, cashier's checks, financial binders, and your mother's cedar chest." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Grace's tone sharpened slightly. "There's more. What one listed item says estate records." Ethan frowned. "What estate?" "That's exactly what I want to know." At 1:14 p.m., Ethan met Grace again at her office. Printed emails covered the conference table now. Claire Benton had apparently coordinated movers using her real estate office account, assuming nobody would ever inspect it closely. One email stood out immediately. From Claire Benton to Bryce Harlan. Subject: move timeline. Marissa wants everything transferred before public claim appointment. Ethan still doesn't know about the estate file. Ethan stared at the sentence. "What estate file?" Grace slid another document toward him. An archived probate notice from 5 years earlier. Ethan's stomach tightened slowly. The file belonged to his late uncle Raymond Caldwell, a quiet farmer from Boone County who had died without children. Ethan remembered the estate vaguely, mostly farmland. Some investments, nothing dramatic. Grace tapped the document carefully. Your uncle left partial mineral rights holdings tied to agricultural land leases. Ethan looked confused, so Grace opened another folder. Those leases became extremely valuable last year after energy expansion projects. Now Ethan understood, not fully, but enough. How valuable? Grace held his gaze. Potentially several $1 million. The room went completely silent. Ethan leaned back slowly. I never saw any of this. Apparently, someone else did. Grace pointed toward another printed email. From Bryce Harlan to Marissa Caldwell. Once lottery clears, combine everything under Bright River Holdings. Ethan read the line twice. Bright River Holdings, the same LLC Grace discovered tied to hidden transfers. They were building something, Ethan said quietly. Yes. Before the lottery. Yes. Grace folded her arms. The jackpot accelerated the timeline. It didn't create it. Outside her office windows, snow had finally begun falling lightly across downtown Des Moines. Ethan stared at the evidence spread across the table. Affair, hidden accounts, storage units, estate documents, corporate shells. The marriage now looked less like emotional collapse and more like financial extraction planned quietly over time. Grace watched him carefully. You okay, I'm thinking. About what? Ethan looked toward the snowfall outside. How many times has she already decided to leave without actually leaving? Grace said nothing, because there was no clean answer to that. At 3:56 p.m., another surprise arrived. Karen stepped into the conference room carrying a sealed envelope. Courier delivery, she said. Grace opened it immediately. Inside sat official notice from Bryce Harlan's attorney. Motion to restrict Ethan Caldwell from accessing or discussing contents of Unit B-14 publicly. Grace laughed softly under her breath. They're panicking. Ethan looked up. How can you tell? Because innocent people rarely file emergency motions to hide storage lockers. She handed him the final page. Attached was a partial inventory list, recovered from Bryce's own filing. Most items appeared generic. Furniture, documents, personal effects, but one line froze Ethan immediately. Item 47, original signed Powerball photocopies and contingency divorce planning notes. Grace saw his expression. Yes, she said quietly. They wrote it down. Snow continued falling outside while the room stayed perfectly still. Then Grace slowly closed the folder. And now she said, I want to know exactly when those notes were written. The deposition took place on a Monday morning inside a glass conference room on the 22nd floor of the Financial Center, downtown Des Moines. Snow still covered parts of the sidewalks outside, turning gray beneath traffic and boots. Television vans remained parked near the building entrance, like permanent fixtures now. Inside Conference Room C, everything looked polished enough to disguise how brutal the next few hours would become. Long walnut table, pitchers of water, rows of legal pads, 3 cameras, recording continuously. Marissa Caldwell sat beside Richard Vale, wearing a dark green blazer and pearl earrings. Her makeup looked flawless beneath the overhead lights, but Ethan noticed the tension in her hands immediately. She kept rubbing her thumb against her index finger beneath the table. Bryce Harlan sat farther down beside his own attorney. For the first time since this began, Ethan saw him without the easy confidence from the storage facility. Bryce looked irritated. Not nervous yet, but irritated people made mistakes. Grace Whitman organized documents quietly, while the court reporter adjusted equipment near the wall. Ethan sat beside her in silence. No outbursts, no dramatic speeches, just observation. The deposition officially began at 9:03 a.m. Richard Vale started carefully. Mrs. Caldwell, when did you first become aware that the Powerball ticket was a winning ticket? Marissa folded her hands together. The night of the drawing. And who purchased the ticket? I did. Grace did not even look up before speaking. Objection to characterization. Compound ownership evidence already established. Richard continued anyway. And was your husband involved in selecting numbers? Marissa hesitated slightly. Not really. Grace made another note. Ethan noticed it immediately. Small hesitation, time-stamped. Useful for later. The questioning continued for nearly 40 minutes. Marissa repeated the same themes carefully. She bought the ticket. She felt emotionally unsafe. Ethan controlled finances. The marriage had been deteriorating. All rehearsed. All polished. Then Grace stood. The room changed instantly. She carried no stack of dramatic papers, just a thin black folder. Mrs. Caldwell. Grace began calmly. You testified that Mr. Caldwell was not involved in purchasing the ticket. Correct. Yes. Grace pressed a button on the monitor remote. The gas station surveillance image appeared instantly. Marissa and Ethan standing together beneath fluorescent lights. The signatures visible. Is this you? Yes. And is that your husband beside you? Yes. Grace zoomed closer toward the register footage. Who handed payment to the cashier? Marissa shifted slightly. Ethan. With which card, I don't remember. Grace slid a printed bank statement across the table. First Horizon Joint. Checking account ending in 4417. Marissa remained silent briefly. Yes. Grace nodded once. So marital funds purchased the ticket. Richard immediately objected. Calls for legal conclusion. Grace ignored him completely. Mrs. Caldwell, did you sign the back of the ticket voluntarily? Another pause. Yes. And did your husband sign it voluntarily? Yes. Grace turned another page. Did you tell the cashier, quote, deal, after he joked about splitting winnings fairly? Marissa's jaw tightened. I don't remember exactly. Grace pressed play on the surveillance audio. Lenny Brooks's voice filled the room softly. Split it fair. If you win. Then Marissa's recorded laugh. Deal. Silence followed. Bryce shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ethan remained perfectly still. Grace continued in the same calm tone. At approximately 10:58 p.m. on the night of the drawing, you changed the electronic locks on the marital residence. Correct? Marissa glanced toward Richard briefly. Yes. Before or after Mr. Caldwell arrived home? Before. Why, I was overwhelmed. Grace nodded slowly. Did you also transfer approximately $70,000 from joint accounts before midnight? That money was mine. Grace slid another document across the table. Deposits from Mr. Caldwell's payroll account funded over 68% of that account balance during the previous 24 months. Richard objected again. Harassing. Grace looked directly at Marissa now. No, Richard. Harassing would be asking why she contacted media outlets before contacting financial advisors. The room became still. Marissa's expression hardened instantly. I had every right to tell my story. Grace opened another folder. At 7:42 a.m., the morning after the drawing, you contacted Trevor Hayes at Channel 8 News. Marissa blinked once. How do you know that Grace ignored the question? You also contacted Claire Benton at 5:58 a.m. Correct, no answer. Grace continued anyway. And at 8:13 a.m., Bryce Harlan. Bryce looked sharply toward Marissa. Interesting, Ethan thought. That one surprised him. Grace noticed too. Mrs. Caldwell, she continued quietly. When exactly did your relationship with Mr. Harlan resume? Richard stood immediately. Objection. Relevance. Grace turned toward him. Asset concealment, coordination, and financial conspiracy are extremely relevant. Bryce's attorney spoke for the first time. My client denies involvement in any conspiracy. Grace smiled faintly. Then he should enjoy the next section. She connected another document to the monitor. Email records. Dated 3 weeks before the lottery drawing. From Marissa Caldwell to Bryce Harlan. Once this is done, we won't have to hide anymore. Bryce closed his eyes briefly. Marissa stared at the screen without speaking. Grace stepped closer to the table. Would you like to explain what this referred to? Richard whispered urgently toward Marissa now. But Ethan noticed something important. Marissa was no longer controlling the pace. The evidence was. Grace continued methodically. Let's discuss Midwest Secure Storage Unit B14. Marissa's breathing changed slightly. Did you move marital property into that unit number? Grace immediately displayed surveillance stills from the storage facility. Marissa carrying Ethan's mother's cedar chest beside Bryce's SUV. Timestamp visible. The room went silent again. Would you like to revise your answer? Grace asked. Marissa looked toward Ethan for the first time in nearly an hour. Not hatred this time. Calculation collapsing. Ethan watched quietly. No satisfaction rose inside him, only confirmation. Grace moved to the final folder. Now let's discuss Bright River Holdings. Bryce leaned forward immediately. That company has nothing to do with this. Grace ignored him. She displayed corporate formation documents, transfer records, consulting payments, shell account routing. Then finally, the inventory list from Unit B14. Item 47 highlighted in yellow. Original signed Powerball photocopies and contingency divorce planning notes. The room changed again. Even the court reporter stopped typing for half a second before resuming. Grace looked directly at Marissa. When were those contingency divorce notes created? No response. Grace repeated the question slowly. When? Richard finally intervened. My client declines to answer pending privilege review. Grace nodded calmly. Understood. Then she reached into the folder one final time. Ethan noticed the document immediately, because Grace had shown it to him only once before. Metadata reports, digital timestamps, creation histories. Grace placed the report directly in front of Marissa. These notes, she said quietly, were first drafted 19 days before the lottery drawing. Silence. Heavy silence. Bryce looked at Marissa sharply. Marissa looked at the table. Richard rubbed his forehead slowly. Grace's voice stayed perfectly level. So, let me summarize clearly. She folded her hands. You created divorce contingency plans before the lottery. You transferred marital funds 4 months through Bryce Harlan's LLC. You rented a hidden storage unit before the jackpot. You moved marital property before public claim verification. And within minutes of learning the ticket was worth $600 million, you changed the locks and attempted unilateral control. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. Nobody spoke. Then Grace asked the question that finally cracked the room open. Mrs. Caldwell, did you change the locks before or after you realized your husband's signature was still on the back of that ticket? Marissa's composure broke for the first time. Not dramatically, just enough. Her eyes flicked toward Ethan instinctively, and Ethan finally saw it clearly. Fear? Not of losing the marriage. Not of losing Bryce. Fear of losing control over the money she already believed belonged only to her. The court reporter kept typing steadily, while snow drifted beyond the windows high above Des Moines. Then Bryce's attorney leaned toward him urgently and whispered something too low to hear. Bryce's face changed instantly. Color drained slowly from it. Grace noticed immediately. So she said softly, "There's something else, isn't there?" No one answered. But Ethan suddenly understood that the storage unit was not the biggest secret in the room anymore. The hearing began at 8:30 a.m. inside Polk County Family Courtroom 4B. Outside the courthouse, reporters lined the frozen sidewalks beneath gray January skies, while satellite trucks idled beside dirty snowbanks. By now, the case had spread far beyond Iowa. National morning shows debated it. Podcasts dissected it. Internet lawyers built entire channels around it. But inside courtroom 4B, none of that mattered. Only evidence did. Judge Harold Mercer entered precisely on time, carrying a thin stack of documents and a pair of reading glasses balanced low on his nose. He looked like the kind of man who had spent 30 years watching people lie professionally. Everyone stood. Ethan sat beside Grace Whitman at the left table. Across the aisle, Marissa sat beside Richard Vail and Dana Mercer. Bryce Harlan occupied the second row behind them with his attorney. For the first time since the lottery drawing, Marissa looked tired. Not physically, structurally, like someone carrying too many unstable stories at once. Judge Mercer adjusted papers quietly. "I have reviewed preliminary motions, deposition excerpts, financial disclosures, and preservation filings," he said. "This court is not interested in television narratives." The sentence immediately changed the atmosphere. Good, Ethan thought. The judge continued. "This court is interested." Facts. Grace stood first. No dramatic opening, no emotional speech, just chronology. The Powerball ticket was purchased using marital funds. She began. Both parties selected numbers. Both parties signed the ticket voluntarily. Within minutes of learning the ticket had won $600 million, Mrs. Caldwell transferred joint assets, changed residential locks, and initiated concealment activity tied to pre-existing divorce planning. Judge Mercer nodded once. Proceed. Grace moved carefully through timelines displayed on courtroom monitors, gas station surveillance, joint bank statements, ring lock records, storage unit access logs, each piece connected cleanly into the next. Ethan watched the judge closely. Mercer rarely reacted outwardly, but he wrote constantly. That mattered more. Grace eventually displayed the Bright River Holdings records. Your Honor, these transfers began 8 months before the lottery drawing. The judge looked toward Marissa's legal team. Response: Richard Vale stood smoothly. My client acknowledges financial movement, but disputes characterization of concealment. Grace immediately countered. Then perhaps opposing counsel can explain why marital assets were moved into a hidden storage facility under the name of Mrs. Caldwell's former romantic partner. Bryce shifted visibly in the gallery behind them. Judge Mercer noticed. So noted. Richard attempted another angle. The marriage had deteriorated significantly before the lottery event. Likely true, Judge Mercer replied calmly. That does not invalidate marital ownership statutes. Richard sat back down slowly. Ethan noticed Marissa staring at the monitor, displaying the ticket signatures. She looked at them constantly now, like they had become a physical enemy. At 9:42 a.m., the Iowa Lottery legal representative testified remotely through video conference. A middle-aged compliance director named Ellen Cartwright appeared on the screen from lottery headquarters. Grace approached carefully. Mrs. Cartwright, does Iowa Lottery recognize signed tickets as ownership indicators? Yes, and in this case, how many signatures appear? 2. Would Iowa Lottery normally process unilateral payout when ownership disputes exist? Number Y. Because improper distribution creates liability exposure and potential fraud risk. Judge Mercer folded his hands. So the lottery itself recognizes competing ownership claims. Yes, Your Honor. Richard Vale attempted cross-examination. Next, Mrs. Cartwright, does signing a ticket automatically establish equal ownership percentages? Thank you. Richard sat down, appearing satisfied. But Grace immediately stood again. Mrs. Cartwright, does a joint signature strengthen ownership claims when combined with marital purchase records and supporting evidence? Yes. The courtroom fell quiet again. Simple answers were becoming dangerous. At 10:27 a.m., Grace introduced the metadata report from the contingency divorce planning notes recovered through storage records. Creation date, 19 days before the jackpot drawing. Modification timestamps followed. References to asset separation strategy. Projected liquidation timelines. Potential relocation planning. Judge Mercer read silently for several moments, then looked toward Marissa. Mrs. Caldwell, he said evenly, were you preparing for divorce? prior to the lottery? Richard immediately intervened. My client is not testifying today. Judge Mercer nodded. Understood. But the question remained hanging heavily inside the courtroom. Grace approached the podium one final time before recess. Your Honor, this is not a revenge case. Ethan looked toward her. Good, because it wasn't. Grace continued calmly. Mr. Caldwell is not requesting punitive seizure, public humiliation, or disproportionate allocation. He requests lawful recognition of marital ownership and restoration of concealed assets. Judge Mercer studied Ethan directly for the first time that morning. Mr. Caldwell. Ethan stood. You have remained unusually quiet throughout these proceedings. Yes, Your Honor. Why the courtroom became completely still. Cameras from sketch artists moved slightly. Even reporters in the back row looked up. Ethan answered honestly. Because talking wouldn't change the paperwork. Judge Mercer stared at him for several seconds, then nodded once. A small nod, but real. Court recessed at 11:14 a.m. Outside in the hallway, reporters exploded toward both legal teams immediately. Mrs. Caldwell, did you hide marital assets? Mr. Caldwell, are you seeking half the jackpot? Bryce, were you involved? Before the lottery security officers pushed the media back aggressively, Grace guided Ethan toward a side corridor instead. Inside a private consultation room, she finally exhaled heavily. That went well. Ethan loosened his tie slightly. She looked scared. She should. Grace opened her tablet. The judge already requested expanded forensic accounting review. Ethan nodded slowly, meaning more scrutiny, more records, more timelines. The system moved slowly, but once moving, it rarely stopped halfway. At 12:03 p.m. Karen entered the consultation room carrying fresh documents. Emergency update, she said. Grace reviewed them quickly, then looked up sharply. What Grace handed the papers to Ethan. Court-appointed forensic accountants had completed preliminary analysis of Bright River Holdings. Multiple hidden transfers confirmed. Undisclosed asset routing established. Potential fraudulent concealment indicators noted. Ethan scanned the totals. More money than expected. Far more. Some transfers connected directly to cashier's checks. Others linked to undeclared investment accounts in Illinois. Grace leaned back slowly. This changes settlement exposure dramatically. Ethan looked toward the courthouse window, where snow drifted across downtown streets. What happens now? Grace answered carefully. Now, opposing counsel starts calculating risk. At 1:26 p.m., the afternoon session resumed. Judge Mercer returned with noticeably less patience. I have reviewed preliminary accounting findings, he said immediately. I am deeply concerned by apparent concealment activity. Richard Vale stood quickly. Your Honor, we dispute intent characterization. Judge Mercer removed his glasses slowly. Counselor people, do not accidentally create shell companies named Bright River Holdings while moving marital assets through third-party storage facilities. Silence. The judge continued. Nor do they accidentally change residential locks minutes after learning of a $600 million jackpot. Marissa looked down at the table. Judge Mercer's voice remained calm, but colder now. This court will maintain the existing freeze on all lottery distributions, pending final allocation review. Reporters scribbled furiously in the back rows. Additionally, the judge continued, I am authorizing expanded forensic investigation into all associated transfers entities and concealed holdings. Bryce's attorney stood abruptly. Your Honor, sit down. He sat immediately. Judge Mercer turned another page. One final issue. The courtroom quieted further. I have reviewed references to the Caldwell Estate mineral rights documentation. Ethan looked up sharply. Grace remained expressionless beside him. Judge Mercer continued. If those records were knowingly concealed during marital asset preparation, consequences may extend beyond family court. That sentence landed like a hammer. Not divorce consequences. Potential fraud consequences. For the first time all day, Bryce looked genuinely frightened. Marissa closed her eyes briefly. Judge Mercer gathered his papers slowly. This court values calm behavior, documented evidence, and lawful process, he said, not media campaigns. Then he looked directly toward Ethan again. Mr. Caldwell appears to understand that distinction. The hearing adjourned at 2:11 p.m. Outside the courtroom, chaos exploded again among reporters and cameras. But Ethan barely heard any of it anymore. Because, as he walked beside Grace toward the elevator, she leaned closer and spoke quietly. They're going to try settling soon. Ethan looked at her. You sure? Grace nodded once. Yes. Then she handed him a newly received forensic summary. At the bottom of the page, highlighted in yellow, sat one line, unaccounted transfers still pending trace analysis. And beside it, estimated value unknown. The accountants arrived at Grace Whitman's office, carrying 4 bankers' boxes and 2 encrypted hard drives. Outside downtown, Des Moines disappeared beneath freezing rain that coated sidewalks in gray slush. Reporters still waited near the courthouse most mornings, now hoping for another dramatic leak from the lottery case. Inside the conference room, however, the atmosphere had shifted completely. This was no longer emotional litigation. It was forensic reconstruction. Ethan sat quietly at the end of the table while 2 court-appointed financial investigators unpacked spreadsheets, transaction logs, and transfer maps across the polished wood surface. One of them, a thin man named Daniel Keene, adjusted his glasses and spoke first. We traced additional movement through Bright River Holdings. Grace folded her arms. How bad Daniel looked toward Ethan briefly before answering. Organized. That word mattered more than large numbers. Organized meant intentional. The second accountant, Monica Reyes, opened a laptop and projected a financial flowchart onto the wall monitor. Lines spread across the screen like veins. Joint accounts, Shell LLCs, consulting transfers, cashier's checks, temporary holding accounts. Ethan studied the structure silently. Old instincts woke fully now. He recognized layering immediately. Break large transfers into smaller pieces. route through intermediary entities, delayed direct visibility, classic concealment behavior. Daniel pointed toward a highlighted section. These transfers originally appeared unrelated, but metadata timing linked them. How? Grace asked. Recurring invoice formatting. Ethan leaned slightly forward. Templates. Daniel nodded. Same document generator. Same timestamp signatures. Meaning Bryce had not even bothered hiring professionals. They built the concealment themselves. That made it sloppier. Monica clicked another file open. Here's the larger issue. A spreadsheet appeared. Rows of outgoing payments tied to BH Consulting Group. Some labeled consulting, others labeled staging expenses. One line stood out immediately. Property acquisition hold, $410,000. Grace narrowed her eyes. What property? Monica switched screens again. An LLC purchase agreement appeared. Buyer Bright River Holdings, Property Lake Condominium Unit, Chicago. Purchase date, 6 days before the lottery drawing. Ethan stared at the screen. They bought property together. Looks that way, Monica said. Grace leaned back slowly. With marital funds. Daniel nodded. And hidden ownership structures. The room went quiet. Not because of the affair anymore, because the scale was expanding. Ethan looked toward the rain-streaked windows. Months earlier, while he repaired rooftop systems in Iowa, Winters, Marissa, and Bryce had apparently been building another life in another state. Quietly, carefully. Grace watched Ethan closely. You okay? Yes. And strangely, he meant it. Not because the betrayal hurt less. Because it finally had complete shape now. Nothing vague remained. At 11:26 a.m., Monica opened another folder. This part matters for court. The monitor displayed a timeline comparing major events. Creation of Bright River Holdings. First transfers. Storage unit rental. Drafted divorce contingency notes. Condominium acquisition. Lottery drawing. Lock change. Media outreach. The sequence looked devastating. Daniel pointed toward the dates. The planning started long before the jackpot. Grace nodded once, which means the ticket accelerated execution, not intent. Exactly. Ethan understood why that mattered legally. Marissa's attorneys had framed her as emotionally overwhelmed by sudden wealth. But structured preparation destroyed that narrative. This was strategy, not panic. At noon, Grace ordered sandwiches nobody touched. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner while the accountants continued tracing accounts. Ethan eventually stood and walked toward the window overlooking downtown. Traffic crawled below through freezing rain. For years he had believed quiet stability mattered more than appearances. Steady work, paid bills, fixed problems without drama. Meanwhile, another life had apparently been unfolding around him in fragments he ignored. Grace approached quietly beside him. You're not reacting the way most clients would. Ethan watched windshield wipers moving across traffic below. Most clients probably weren't fraud investigators. She almost smiled faintly. Fair. He crossed his arms slowly. I keep thinking about timing. What specifically the condo? Grace nodded. Before the lottery. Yes, meaning Marissa planned to leave. Even without $600 million? The jackpot simply changed the scale of escape. At 1:44 p.m., Daniel suddenly sat upright. Wait. Everyone looked toward him. He enlarged another transaction chain. This account shouldn't exist. Grace stepped closer. What account? Daniel pointed toward an Illinois investment vehicle tied indirectly to Bright River Holdings. Beneficiary designation hidden behind corporate shielding. But one attached metadata field remained visible accidentally. Account Administrator Claire Benton. Grace exhaled slowly. The realtor friend. Monica typed rapidly. Hold on. More records loaded. Then another problem appeared. Several transfers had originated from a previously unknown source account. Not Marissa's, not Bryce's, someone else. Daniel frowned deeply. This doesn't make sense. Ethan stepped closer now. What Daniel highlighted the routing source. Estate Reserve Account Caldwell, Agricultural Trust. The room became silent again. Ethan stared at the words. That's my uncle's estate. Yes, Daniel said slowly. Or what remains of it. Grace looked sharply toward Ethan. You never accessed those funds. No? Monica opened probate records quickly. The trust remained dormant after Raymond Caldwell's death. Until when Grace asked. Monica swallowed slightly. Until 3 months ago. Someone had reactivated the estate structure quietly. Ethan leaned forward. How Daniel clicked another document open. Power of attorney authorization. Signed electronically. Executor modification request. Grace stared at the screen for several long seconds. Then this signature is forged. The room shifted instantly. Forgery changed everything. Not unethical behavior, potential criminal behavior. Ethan looked closer at the signature line. His name, misspelled slightly. Ethan Caldwell. Tiny error. Huge consequence. Daniel shook his head slowly. They tried reopening the estate through digital filing. Grace immediately grabbed her phone. I'm calling the forensic examiner. The next hour passed fast. Too fast. Documents multiplied across the conference table while accountants reconstructed movement patterns tied to the Caldwell Trust. Most transfers failed, eventually because secondary authorization requirements blocked completion. But several smaller withdrawals succeeded first, enough to move nearly $180,000. Ethan sat back heavily. They were stealing from my family before the lottery. Grace's expression hardened. Yes, no softness left in her voice now, only precision. At 3:18 p.m., another email arrived from opposing counsel requesting confidential settlement discussions. Grace read it once and handed the tablet toward Ethan. That was quicker than expected. Ethan read silently. In the interest of avoiding further reputational harm and prolonged litigation. Grace laughed quietly. Translation. They're scared. Exactly. The accountants had now confirmed hidden assets, concealed transfers, pre-lottery divorce planning, shell companies, potential forgery, and attempted trust manipulation. The story looked completely different now. At 4:07 p.m., Ethan finally called his mother for the first time since the hearings escalated publicly. She answered on the second ring. Ethan. Her voice sounded older lately. Tired. You okay, Mom? I should ask you that. He smiled faintly despite himself. You watching the news? Unfortunately. Rain tapped softly against Grace's office windows while Ethan stared at the evidence-covered conference table. His mother spoke carefully. I know what kind of man you are. The sentence landed harder than expected. Ethan looked down briefly. They tried touching Uncle Ray's estate. Silence. Then what? He explained slowly. Not everything. Just enough. When he finished, his mother exhaled shakily. Raymond trusted you. I know. And you never touched $1. I know. More silence. Then she said quietly, Your father used to say calm men scare dishonest people the most. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, because suddenly he understood something clearly. Marissa had never really feared him. She feared documentation, structure, patience. The kind of patience that waited long enough for patterns to expose themselves. At 5:26 p.m., Grace re-entered the conference room carrying another printed report. Forensic signature review. Ethan stood immediately. Well, Grace handed him the report, a preliminary conclusion. High probability of unauthorized digital signature fabrication. Grace folded her arms. That's enough to bring criminal investigators into the conversation. The freezing rain outside finally turned to snow again. Downtown lights glowed softly through the gray evening while traffic slowed beneath the storm. Ethan looked back toward the transaction charts on the wall. Every line now connected. Not perfectly yet, but enough to see the shape beneath the chaos. Grace gathered the files carefully into organized stacks. They'll push hard for settlement now, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. Because of the forgery. Because once criminal exposure enters family court, people suddenly become very motivated to negotiate. Ethan looked toward the snow outside, then toward the evidence, then finally toward the frozen image of the Powerball ticket still displayed on the conference monitor. 2 signatures, still there, still impossible to erase. Then Karen appeared at the doorway again, holding a sealed overnight envelope. Grace, she said carefully, this just arrived from Chicago. Grace took it slowly. Return address, Harlan and Pierce, Private Holdings. Bryce's investment office. Inside was a single flash drive, and attached to it one handwritten sentence. You still don't know what Marissa planned after the payout. The Des Moines Marriott downtown smelled faintly of polished wood, expensive coffee, and cold winter coats drying near the lobby heaters. By 8:15 a.m., 3 security guards stood outside Conference Suite 11. A while, reporters crowded the hotel entrance downstairs, hoping for leaks from the settlement meeting. Nobody smiled walking into the room. Not anymore. The long oval table inside Suite 11A held neatly arranged water glasses, legal pads, and stacks of settlement drafts prepared overnight. Grace Whitman arrived first with Ethan. Across the room, Richard Vale entered beside Marissa and Dana Mercer. 10 minutes later, Bryce Harlan did not appear. That alone told Ethan plenty. He sat quietly near the end of the table while snow drifted slowly beyond the hotel windows overlooking downtown Des Moines. Marissa looked thinner now, still elegant, still controlled, but the confidences she wore during the television interview had disappeared somewhere between the forensic audits and the trust forgery findings. Richard Vale opened carefully. My client wishes to resolve this matter privately. Grace almost smiled. Of course she does. No one argued, because everyone understood what privately meant now. No criminal referrals. No expanded fraud investigation. No public trial, dissecting every transfer and forged document on national television. Richard slid a proposal across the table. Grace reviewed it silently, then handed it to Ethan. The terms were aggressive. Marissa would retain 60% of post-tax lottery proceeds. Bright River Holdings assets remain separate. No admission of wrongdoing. Mutual non-disparagement. Grace leaned back slowly. That's not a settlement, she said. That's fantasy. Richard folded his hands. My client is attempting compromise. Grace opened another folder calmly. Your client forged estate documents. Dana Mercer immediately intervened. Allegedly. Grace slid the forensic signature analysis across the table. Not especially allegedly. Silence settled over the room. Marissa stared toward the windows instead of the evidence. Ethan watched her quietly. Weeks ago, she had looked at him like an obstacle. Now she looked exhausted from maintaining collapsing stories. Richard tried another angle. If this proceeds publicly, both parties suffer. Grace nodded once. True. Then she turned toward Ethan. Would you like to respond? Everyone looked at him. Ethan rested his hands calmly on the table. The ticket gets divided legally. Simple. No speech. No revenge performance. Richard adjusted his tie slightly. And the remaining issues, my mother's property gets returned. Marissa finally looked at him directly. You think this is all about fairness? Ethan met her eyes evenly. No, I think this is about ownership. The room became still again. Grace continued from there. Here are our terms. She slid a thick document packet across the table. Equal division of lottery proceeds, afterteas and mandatory deductions. Full disclosure of all Bright River Holdings accounts. Return of concealed family property. Reimbursement of hidden transfers from marital funds. Civil release conditioned on complete transparency. And one final clause. Any future evidence of concealed assets reopens litigation automatically. Richard read slowly. Dana Mercer looked increasingly tense beside him. Marissa barely touched the papers. Grace folded her arms. Take your time. At 9:42 a.m., the first break began. Ethan stood near the hotel windows overlooking Locust Street, while snowflakes drifted around traffic below. Grace approached quietly beside him. They're weaker than I expected. Ethan nodded slightly. Bryce disappeared. Yes, that matters. Grace looked toward the conference room doors. It means his attorney probably advised separation, which meant risk calculation. Bryce likely no longer trusted Marissa either. The cracks were spreading everywhere now. Behind them, Richard Vale spoke quietly with Dana Mercer near the coffee station. Marissa remained seated alone at the conference table, staring at the settlement documents. Not crying, not angry, just still. Ethan noticed something strange then. For the first time since this began, she looked less like someone fighting for freedom, and more like someone trapped by momentum she created herself. At 10:18 a.m. negotiations resumed. Richard's tone had changed noticeably. My client is prepared to discuss equal distribution frameworks. Grace nodded once. Good. But certain language regarding fraud exposure must remain excluded. Grace leaned back. That depends on disclosure completeness. Dana Mercer finally spoke directly to Marissa in a low whisper. Marissa nodded without looking up. Then Richard pushed another document across the table. Revised proposal. Closer now. Much closer. Lottery division. 50-50. Post-tax. Bright River assets disclosed. Chicago condominium liquidated. Family property returned. Mutual media silence agreements. Grace reviewed the changes carefully, then stopped at one paragraph. Absolutely not. Richard frowned. What? Grace tapped the page. This clause shields third-party liability connected to trust activity. Richard said nothing, because he knew exactly why it mattered. Grace removed the page entirely. No protection for forged documents. Marissa finally spoke again. It wasn't supposed to go that far. The room quieted immediately. Richard closed his eyes briefly. Bad sentence, Ethan thought. Very bad sentence. Grace leaned slightly forward. What exactly wasn't supposed to go that far? Richard interrupted instantly. We are not discussing intent. Too late. The sentence already existed now, recorded mentally by everyone in the room. Ethan watched Marissa carefully. She looked down at her hands. The performance was gone completely now. Only fatigue remained. At 11:37 a.m., another break. This time, Marissa approached Ethan alone, near the hallway outside the conference suite. The hotel corridor remained empty, except for distant elevator chimes and muted lobby noise downstairs. You really hate me now? She asked quietly. Ethan looked at her for several seconds before answering. No. That surprised her. I thought you would. He leaned lightly against the wall. I think you decided to leave long before the ticket. Marissa looked away. Snowlight reflected softly across the hallway windows. You stopped seeing me years ago, she said. Ethan considered that carefully. Maybe partially true, but not enough to explain forged documents and hidden companies. You could have just left, he said calmly. She laughed once under her breath. With what money? There it was. Not romance, not heartbreak. Fear of instability, Fear of losing lifestyle? Fear of becoming ordinary again? Ethan suddenly understood something important. Marissa never truly loved money itself. She loved what money protected her from. At noon, final negotiations resumed. Richard Vale looked exhausted now. "We can finalize today," he said carefully. "But my client requires assurance this matter ends fully." Grace looked toward Ethan. Again, everyone waited for him. The room remained perfectly silent, except for distant hotel ventilation humming overhead. Ethan studied the settlement pages carefully, then finally asked one question. Was Bryce going to move into the Chicago condo? Marissa froze briefly, not from guilt, from honesty, arriving too late. Yes. Ethan nodded once. No anger followed, just confirmation. Grace slid the final revised agreement toward Richard. "These are the last terms." Richard reviewed silently. "No protection clauses for forgery. Full disclosure obligations. Mandatory liquidation transparency. Equal lottery distribution. No further media statements." Marissa stared at the pages for a very long time, then finally picked up the pen. Her hand trembled slightly for the first time anyone had seen publicly. Ethan watched her sign slowly. Marissa Caldwell. The same signature that still sat on the back of the Powerball ticket. Richard signed next. Then Grace handed the document toward Ethan. He read every page carefully. Old habits again. Never sign emotionally, only structurally. Finally, he signed. Ethan Caldwell. Grace collected the papers immediately. "It's done," she said quietly. "Not victory, not happiness, just done." Outside the hotel windows, snow continued falling across Des Moines, while reporters still waited below for drama that would never come. At 2:18 p.m., Ethan exited through a private side entrance beside Grace. The freezing air hit sharply against his face. For the first time in weeks, nobody shouted questions immediately. No cameras close enough, no microphones. Just cold winter silence. Grace unlocked the Audi. "One more thing," she said, before getting inside. "What?" "The Iowa lottery called during the meeting." Ethan looked at her. "They finalized release authorization." His breath fogged faintly in the cold air. Meaning Grace allowed herself a small, tired smile. "The money finally moves next week." Snow drifted between them quietly. Then Grace added one final sentence. "And Bryce Harlan left Illinois this morning." Ethan frowned slightly. "Where'd he go?" Grace opened the driver's side door slowly. "Nobody seems to know." The money arrived on a Thursday morning just after 9 a.m. No fireworks, no television crews, no giant check. Ethan Caldwell sat inside Grace Whitman's office, wearing the same dark winter coat he had worn the night Marissa locked him out of the house. A quiet notification appeared on his phone screen. Available balance updated. The number beneath it looked unreal, even after taxes, legal fees, and settlement distributions had carved away enormous pieces. Still enough money to change several lifetimes. Grace leaned back in her chair after confirming the transfer. "Well," she said quietly, "you officially survived the strangest divorce in Iowa history. Ethan looked at the screen a moment longer before locking the phone again. It didn't feel like victory, mostly because the cost had arrived before the money. Trust, privacy, normal life, those things never refunded themselves. Outside the office windows, late February sunlight reflected off melting snowbanks along downtown streets. Des Moines looked ordinary again. That helped. Grace watched him carefully. You know what most people do first? What buy? Something stupid. Ethan almost smiled faintly. I already bought something. Grace raised an eyebrow. What? He handed her a folded receipt. Mercy One Medical Center Foundation, donation $2 million. For H. Via. See apprenticeship scholarships and technical training programs across Iowa. Grace stared at the paper. You donated $2 million before buying a car. I already have a truck. That made her laugh for the first time in weeks. A real laugh this time, not courtroom laughter. At 11:42 a.m., Ethan drove toward Boone County beneath clear winter skies. His old Ford still rattled slightly at stoplights. The heater still clicked every few minutes. He kept it anyway. The Caldwell family cemetery sat beside a small church road outside Boone. Snow remained scattered between gravestones beneath bare trees. Ethan stood quietly in front of Raymond Caldwell's grave for several minutes with his hands inside his coat pockets. No speech. No dramatic moment. Just silence. The estate trust had finally been secured legally 2 days earlier after forensic investigators completed reviews. The attempted forgery case remained under separate investigation now. Bryce Harlan had vanished entirely. His attorney claimed he was traveling internationally. Nobody believed it. Marissa disappeared from social media shortly after settlement finalized. The interviews stopped. The influencers moved on. Internet outrage found newer targets. That was how public attention worked. Loud, temporary, disposable. At 1:18 p.m., Ethan met his mother for lunch at a small diner outside Ames called Dorothy's Kitchen. She hugged him longer than usual when he walked in. You look tired, she said. I am. They sat beside the front windows while snowmelt dripped steadily from the awning outside. His mother stirred coffee slowly. So what happens now? Ethan looked around the diner. Truckers eating pie. A couple arguing quietly near the register. Ordinary life continuing normally. I don't know yet. You buying some giant mansion number private jet? No. She smiled faintly. Ethan finally told her about the house near Saylorville Lake. Not huge. 3 bedrooms. Wooden deck overlooking frozen water. Far enough from downtown to stay quiet. His mother listened carefully. That sounds like you. Maybe it did. At 3:47 p.m., Ethan drove to Ashworth Road one final time. The old marital house sat partially empty now, with a for sale sign planted near the curb. No reporters remained. No cameras. Only cold wind moving through bare trees. Marissa's car was gone. Most furniture, too. Inside the rooms echoed faintly now. Ethan walked through, slowly collecting the last remaining boxes Grace's office recovered from storage. His mother's cedar chest sat near the fireplace, waiting for transport home. Untouched, finally. He opened it carefully. Military medals, old photographs, handwritten recipes, family records, simple things, real things. The objects felt more valuable now than numbers on banking screens. As he closed the chest again, he noticed something sitting alone on the kitchen counter, an envelope. His name written across the front. Ethan opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note from Marissa. No apology exactly. No dramatic confession. Just several quiet sentences. You were never weak. I just thought calm people wouldn't fight back. I was wrong. Ethan folded the note once and placed it back inside the envelope. Then he left it on the counter. Some things did not require response. At 6:12 p.m., Ethan arrived at the new house near Saylorville Lake. The driveway curved through pine trees, dusted lightly with snow. The lake beyond looked steel gray beneath the evening sky. The house itself was modest compared to the homes Marissa used to browse online, but it felt solid, quiet, intentional. A locksmith had installed new deadbolts earlier that afternoon. Ethan carried boxes inside one at a time, while cold wind rolled off the water. No moving company, no assistants, just him. The first room he unpacked was not the bedroom or kitchen. It was the small office facing the lake. Inside, he placed Raymond Caldwell's estate documents into a fireproof cabinet beside his old fraud investigation notebooks from Mid-American Bank. Structure again, documentation again, the same habits that saved him. At 8:04 p.m., his phone buzzed. Grace, you settle in okay? She asked. Almost. You hear the latest. Ethan sat on the office floor beside unopened boxes. No. Bryce tried wiring money through Belize yesterday. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. Did it work? Number, federal hold. He shook his head slowly. Some people never stopped running. Grace continued. The criminal side may continue a while, I figured. But your part's over. That sentence stayed quiet between them. Your part's over. After the call ended, Ethan walked outside onto the back deck. The lake stretched dark and still beneath the winter sky. Far away, scattered lights reflected softly across the water. For the first time in months, nobody was watching him. No cameras, no reporters, no legal strategy, just cold air and silence. He thought about the night Marissa locked him outside in the freezing rain while the Ring camera recorded him standing alone on the porch. At the time, she believed control belonged to whoever moved fastest, whoever changed locks first, whoever shaped the story first. But none of that lasted. Not against records, not against patience, not against truth organized carefully enough. The next morning, Ethan drove back into Des Moines before sunrise. Same truck, same coffee order, same quiet roads. At 6:41 a.m., he pulled into the parking lot of Hawkeye Fuel Mart. The blue and yellow sign still flickered exactly the same way it had the night everything changed. Inside, Lenny Brooks looked up from the register and froze. Well, he said slowly, look who survived. Ethan smiled faintly. Coffee's still terrible. Worse every day. Lenny handed over the cup. You buying another ticket? Ethan glanced toward the glowing Powerball sign above the counter, then shook his head. I think I used up my luck. Lenny laughed, softly. As Ethan turned toward the door, he noticed the early morning sunlight beginning to spread across the snowy parking lot outside. Cold, clear, quiet. He stepped into the morning carrying nothing except bad coffee truck keys and the kind of calm that no amount of money could manufacture. Then he unlocked his own door again. This time, nobody was waiting on the other side to take it away. What makes this story painful is not the money. It's the realization that betrayal usually begins long before the moment we finally see it. Ethan lost his marriage long before the lottery numbers appeared on that television screen. But what saved him was something most people underestimate: patience, discipline, and truth that could be proven. He never screamed louder than everyone else. He never chased revenge recklessly. While other people tried to control the story with fear, emotion, and manipulation, Ethan relied on facts, records, and calm thinking. In the end, that became stronger than money itself. A lot of people watching this have probably experienced something similar on a smaller scale. Maybe someone underestimated you because you were quiet. Maybe someone thought kindness meant weakness. Maybe you stayed calm while others tried to destroy your reputation. Stories like this remind us that dignity is not passive. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is stay steady long enough for the truth to reveal itself naturally. If this story meant something to you, let me know in the comments what would you have done in Ethan's position. Fight immediately or stay calm and gather proof first. And if you enjoy stories about betrayal, justice, hidden truths, and quiet comebacks, subscribe to the channel. Tomorrow's story is about a man who lost everything in one night until a forgotten voicemail changed the entire case.